welcome to the NBA Draft.
Do you want a podcast that discusses and breaks down your favorite prospects all the way until they hear their name called on draft night?
Luka Doncic.
Welcome to the home of NBA Draft Prospects.
Words can't describe how I feel right now.
This is the Prospect Pod, presented by Hardwood Hoops Central, only on YouTube.
Fuck who did I offend? Rappers, sit back, I'm about to sit back, sit back, I'm about to begin. Sit back, I'm about sit back, I'm about to begin. Sit back, sit back, I'm about to begin. Sit back, I'm about to begin.
Welcome to another episode of the Prospect Pod presented by Hardwood Hoops Central. I, as always, am your host, Stephen Barnhart. All right, first things first. I know a couple months ago I came back and said that I would do these more often, and obviously I haven't done these in probably about a month. You know, it really, for me, it came down to it's summer basketball. As much as I enjoyed, if you listen to the last pod, I raved about it, but as much as you love it, couple things come down to it. Only so much of that you're going to want to listen to. And then the other thing that gets you to want to listen to NBA or basketball pods is, you know, moves, trades, off-season chatter, rumors, all that stuff. And, you know, if we're being honest, I'm probably not the podcast you're checking for as far as reaction. So I, you know, long story short, it's really not a huge reason to do it. Now, I could have jumped on here and maybe talk some WNBA. I just don't know how much of that you guys want. I don't do this enough to really gauge my audience just yet. So, you know, always feel free to tweet me or go on to our YouTube channel and leave comments and let me know what you want me to talk about, what you want me to hear me talk about, things of that nature, so I can get a gauge of what you guys might be willing to tune into. So anyway, definitely hope you've checked out, you know, some of the summer basketball runs, and you know, this time of year I love going on YouTube and checking out like the Rico Hines private runs. By the way, if you haven't checked any of those out, you're missing out, quite honestly. First of all, Rico Hines is a legend within basketball. If you don't know that name, Google it. Him being hired by the Toronto Raptors was a brilliant move. Those guys, at least within the private open runs that show up on YouTube, you know, they looked good. And again, I understand context and all this and that. But one of the things I found interesting was one of the last episodes came out, I think, last week. Paul George was in one of the open runs, and you know, they try to get vets to speak at the end of the day, you know. And one of the things that Paul George, who was there, spoke about, you know, one of the things he mentioned was like, hey, you Toronto Raptors guys have been here, you know, this entire time. Now, obviously, that's in light of the fact that Rico is now involved with the team, you know, from a player development standpoint. So, you know, that's part of it. But also, you know, those guys aren't required to necessarily be there or whatever, but they're there. And one of the things that PG commented on was like, hey, you guys are here. Not only that, but like, you guys are looking good. I wouldn't be surprised if you guys came out and started hot this upcoming season. So I thought that was an encouraging thing to say from a guy who's obviously, you know, all respect due to what Paul George is capable of doing on the basketball court, and all respect due to the fact that he plays for a team that a lot of people are pretty excited about when you consider him and Kawhi potentially coming back for, I don't want to say a full healthy season because, you know, load management and whatnot, and things happen. That's obviously a Clipper squad that a lot of people are going to enjoy. And by the way, you know, John Wall was a part of that same run that I just mentioned, and, you know, he's clearly working on the shot. He let guys know, too. Guys were going under screens, and he was letting them know, hey, you can't do that shit anymore, which I thought was pretty cool. Pretty cool to see his confidence coming back. You know, I believe there was a story out there, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I probably should Google it while I'm talking, but you know, he mentioned, you know, having some rough struggles mentally. I won't go into anything in particular. I mean, I know he put it out there publicly, but, you know, you guys can Google it. But Suffice it to say that, I'm glad that he's kind of back on the upswing and is finding his confidence. And obviously, when you lose your confidence within your craft, the thing that you love most in this world and have done for the majority of your life, it's a tough thing. It really is. And so I'm glad to see that he's regaining that day by day. And so anyway, definitely, head over to Rico Hines' YouTube channel, check out those open runs if you haven't checked out any of them. A lot of guys pop up. Trae Young, Steph, you name it. There's a lot of guys that pop up. All right. So what I wanted to kind of do here was just, come on and just touch on team signings and just general thoughts and ideas and just general banter, basketball banter and talk. This isn't meant to be about analysis. Sorry for those of you who need me to go through 42 layers of analytics to tell you why I think a team's going to be this or that or the third. Probably not going to be the podcast for you more often than not. There'll be a time and a place for that for me, but for right now, because I haven't talked to you guys in about a month, I just want to come on here and do some general basketball banter. So hopefully you'll indulge me and listen through, and we can have a good time here. So I'm going to go kind of through alphabetical order on just teams that have made moves and things I'm interested in or excited about. So we'll start with the Hawks. Obviously the move there was DeJounte Murray. And, look, I'm really interested to see Trae and DeJounte in their backcourt. Obviously, Trae's not, known for being a defensive stalwart. Pairing him with a guy like DeJounte Murray is a good idea on the surface. A lot of people were saying, well, DeJounte can't play off the ball, and then you start seeing all these clips of him making cuts and, dunks and layups at the rim, and it's like, did you forget that there's off-ball movement? That guys aren't necessarily, when they play off the ball, it doesn't mean they just turn into a wing shooter. So there's that. But I think ultimately, it adds a guy who can be an additional playmaker. You think about all the things that DeJounte Murray can do on the floor, from scoring, rebounding, assisting, and pairing that with Trae, and just, I think that's going to work. I do. For me, any team who has playoff aspirations and wants to advance in the playoffs, you have to develop a defensive identity. Offense is great. We know what the Hawks can do with Trae's ability to score and the different wings that they have. And, Clint, being healthy, being the vertical lob threat that he can be. John Collins, if he's healthy, what he's capable of. This team can score. We know that more or less. And ultimately, it's going to come down to defense for a lot of teams. And so adding DeJounte, I think, is a step in the right direction and starting to develop that more. So I generally, I'm excited for what this team's going to look like and how they're going to compete in the East, an Eastern Conference that is not going anywhere. It's just getting better and better. The swing, as far as the powers that be, certainly going towards the East now. Obviously, Golden State is Golden State. Phoenix is still going to be Phoenix, and there's going to be teams in the West that are still going to compete. Like I mentioned a second ago, the Clippers are obviously going to look to really bounce back. Minnesota made some moves in the offseason to try to further their progress. I mean, there's definitely rumblings in the West for sure. We'll see what happens with the Nuggets, with Jamal Murray, and just, getting back Michael Porter Jr. And Dallas obviously made a nice run in the playoffs. So there's still plenty going on in the West. But it feels like there's been a shift to the East. And just in terms of just overall, top to bottom kind of real competitiveness there. We'll see, but speaking of that, a team that, look like they might lose that competitive edge and that competitiveness, looking at the Brooklyn Nets, the powers that be came together, and Kevin Durant is still a Brooklyn Net. Kyrie is still a Brooklyn Net. I think really when it boils down to it, I do want to see what those guys can look like together healthy. You throw Ben in there. I'm interested. I just look, you can feel the way that you want about Kyrie, Kevin, and Ben. Obviously, they've all become polarizing in their own way for their own reasons. For a lot of you, for me, it's, it is what it is. It's their personal life, whatever their personal beliefs are. They're not forcing it onto me. What Kevin Durant does on Twitter has no never mind to me. I find a lot of it oddly entertaining. Just from the standpoint of, I see so many people saying, well, why do you respond to people? And I'm thinking, a tweet to somebody is almost as good as getting a text message to a celebrity these days. And I constantly got people talking shit in my text messages. I'm eventually going to say something. But I understand that fuels the fire, and that's what people are trying to say. But ultimately, they're really just trying to poke the bear and fuck around. And it's just, it's weird. It really is. Especially because you guys think you're bothering a guy who's like a multi-millionaire, is going to go down as a top 15 player ever, and who's got business ventures left, right, and forward. Like, he's good. And you guys think that, what are you going to do? Bring a chink in his armor because you got him to respond to your tweet? Yeah, it's funny. But that aside, all the off the court stuff between those three guys aside, at the end of the day, they're still very highly skilled, highly talented basketball players. When you talk about pure scorers, Kyrie and Kevin Durant have to come to mind. When you talk about skilled basketball players, especially when you consider the size, Ben Simmons has to come to mind. You can say what you want about his inability or unwillingness to eventually develop a three-point shot or whatever. This playoff run, this playoff loss, I get it. But ultimately, there are a fraction of you or a number of you who think that you're going to just bully a guy into doing something that you think they should do. And ultimately, what you have to realize in this era, guys are going to do what they want, more so now than ever, because they can. Your access to them doesn't keep them from doing that. If anything, you really just push them further into a corner to do more of what they want and just to say, fuck it. They're going to be those guys that develop the me against the world mentality. And some guys respond in a way that is appeasing to those of you who think that the person should improve, and other people say the hell with it. I'm not doing it. So, the funny thing is, a lot of these personalities that you see, everybody's different. I could definitely tell you that if it were me on a personal level, I would be more the person to say, go fuck yourself. Right? That's just me. That's my personality. It's not to say that people can't tell you should improve and tell you where you can get better, but a lot of people want to pass off negativity as, constructive criticism, and it's not constructive. It's, it's thinly veiled, shit talking. So anyway, getting off all that, ultimately, I really am still very much excited to see what this team does. I mean, they add Royce O'Neal, respected wing around the league. Seth Curry's obviously been on the team since last year. Patty Mills, Cam Thomas, TJ Warren on a 1-year deal. Markieff Morris. I mean, they've made some solid additions. And it'll be interesting to see, what step Nick Claxton takes in his game. Day'Ron Sharpe, I still have really high beliefs in what this team can be. I'm not going to sit here and say Eastern Conference this or championship that or whatever. Obviously, there's a lot of factors here. Joe Harris spent time out with injury. Ben's not been a part of the fold. So there's going to need to be a process, like any team coming together for the first time, to figure each other out and play. But you've got high-level basketball. You've got 3 very high-level basketball players in your starting 5. They'll figure it out. Now, somebody's screaming, well, what about with James Harden? Yeah, I get that. But at some point, like, you're going to have that 1 out of 3 that's willing to be, more of the glue guy. If you think about all the big or the specialty player, the glue guy or the specialty player, there's a third guy with all these big threes that always goes into one of those categories, and so, Ray Allen became more of a specialty 3-point shooter, even though his career was taken on that way. Chris Bosh became more of a stretch big. He wasn't always that 20 and 10 guy, even though you knew he could be. I mean, there's other examples. I'm just saying, like, at the end of the day, I think Ben will probably be more likely to be that guy and might be a better fit in terms of simply not needing the ball in his hands necessarily. Hopefully, I'm hoping they'll play him more mid to high posts so he can kind of impact things there, and then helps him out defensively. And, so we'll see. But I definitely am not, just looking past this team. Obviously, you want to see how bad they want to be there and what that's going to look like. And, still a lot of questions about Steve Nash and this and that. And, I get all that. So this team very much could be one Jenga piece away from being pulled out, and all of a sudden things, kind of fall apart again. But the fact that they're all there, I mean, ultimately, none of these guys are getting younger, so it's either going to be a season of producing and trying to get as much out of this as you can, or it's going to be a lost season and another year of your prime gone. And at some point, when you think about Kyrie, he's already won a championship. Kevin Durant's already won a championship. Ben hasn't. So it comes down to really what these guys ultimately want to do from a winning standpoint. We all know what kind of basketball players they are. And so basically, to me, how much do you want to win? And we're going to find out. But I think what the rest of this team is, there's plenty of talent coming off the bench. There's some solid depth here. I'm still excited to see what the Brooklyn Nets will do on the floor night in and night out. So, color me optimistic. All right, Boston Celtics. For me, the big move here obviously was Malcolm Brogdon. If you think back to the finals, Malcolm Brogdon would have helped in terms of just helping execute the offense, moving the basketball, doing some of the things that Marcus Smart and Jason Tatum have been trying to do or been doing, but it's just ultimately not necessarily who they are night in and night out. Marcus, I think there just needs to be a guy that can take the ball and make a play for his teammates. And it's always kind of felt like that's a sort of a forced role, more or less, for Marcus and for Jason. Not to say that Marcus is some lights out scorer or a preferred scorer, but ultimately, when I think about his time at Oklahoma State and just kind of a player, it's going to be more of a guy who's just a big physical guard who wants to attack. Jason's obviously a 3-level scorer and one of the best scorers that we have in this league. And Jalen's obviously an elite wing within his own right. But none of these guys necessarily shout out, hey, I want to, I have to make everybody else around me better in terms of facilitating and just making guys feel comfortable enough to move, knowing they're going to get the ball in their spots. Malcolm can kind of come in and facilitate and do that. So I like the addition for sure. What that means necessarily for, the rotations and whatnot, we're going to see. It's going to be interesting. Right now, you got to assume Marcus, Jalen, Tatum, all these guys are going to start. So ultimately, what do? You move Jason or Jalen to the 4, which you could do, and then eventually have Malcolm kind of come in and have Al kind of come off the bench because he's, got a little bit older and, not necessarily putting the miles on him. I could see that. So, we'll see. I think ultimately, there's possibilities here. And you think about what Derek White was able to do within these past playoffs. Peyton Pritchard's, coming along at a nice pace. Horford looked rejuvenated. Grant Williams, continues to be a solid glue guy. Robert Williams, when not injured, people are still very high on him, and he can be a solid rebounder for you, shot blocker, guy who runs the floor, vertical spacer, all these things. So I really don't expect Boston to take any step back at all. I expect them to still be contending for an Eastern Conference spot to try to get back to the finals. Obviously, that's not an easy thing to do, but nothing to me would suggest otherwise, that they wouldn't be able to do that, or at least have a very good shot at doing that. So we'll see. All right, from there, I'm trying to figure out where I want to go next. Let's talk a little Chicago Bulls. Lonzo, it was just came out recently within the last, I think, few days or week or so. Oh, actually, yeah, last 2 days ago. So he's still having lingering knee issue pain. So it looks like he very well will not make the start of the NBA season. And he's not expected to participate in training camp, obviously. Injuries have been a big part of his career thus far. I mean, I think we all have an understanding, those of us who can appreciate what he does in terms of facilitating, moving the ball. And, obviously his shot has come a ways in terms of the form and just being able to consistently shoot the three. We know what he can do defensively as a guard. He's just complimentary in that he can play with a lot of guys because he's a low-maintenance player who does want to make everybody better. And when you have that, it's easy to insert those guys. And the hard part is that when they have injury history like Lonzo does, it makes it difficult. But, all the players that they need back are back. Levine extends. DeRozan's, still far in the fold. Obviously, Patrick Williams, has made some summer appearances here and there, so he looks like he's well on his way back. And we got Vooch. AO had a really nice year last year, and I think made quite a few people forget about Kobe White. It's not a knock on Kobe or anything, but I think we'll see what AO and Caruso can do off the bench. They add Goran Dragic. So they've got some nice veteran guards mixed with some younger guys who, can be good for them. I don't know if we'll see Dalen Terry at all or how much we'll see him at all. It would be interesting to see him play, but I'd imagine, he's going to spend, a good chunk of time in the G League, and we'll see if at any point he is a part of the fold in Chicago. But that's a guy I'm excited about as a rookie. Look, this team's interesting just in terms of if they're fully healthy, we saw what they could do. They could beat a lot of top-tier teams. They're better defensively than I think they were probably going to get credit for prior to going into last season. But, obviously the X factor with their defense ends up being Lonzo. I mean, Caruso is done well defensively in this league, and but he ultimately is there for you, so you have more depth. And that's what you would like to have. You'd like to have some guys who can keep your second unit kind of together defensively, offensively, and Caruso is a great piece for that. Not to say he shouldn't or can't start, but ultimately you want to be as strong as you can through 1 through 8, 1 through 9, come playoff time especially. So just, we'll see. It's I've always been high on Lonzo, so let's get that out of the way. Because I can always appreciate guys who are lower maintenance guys who ultimately can make guys better around them, and is almost always an addition more than subtraction. Obviously, the subtraction part is if you can't hit open shots, or if you're just not willing to drive to the rim and try to take advantage offensively, some of that certainly can be a hindrance to the offense. But his passing ability is well documented, and his defensive ability is well documented, and there's no shortage of things that he's not willing to do on a basketball floor. So I think ultimately, let's see how quickly he's able to get back. But ultimately, there's enough here between Dragic, Caruso, AO. Again, I think will take another step forward. Patrick Williams being back will certainly help. So be interesting to see, just how well this team continues to play. I still think obviously they're a playoff team for sure, or at least will be competitive at that level. Amongst teams that will be vying for a playoff spot, meaning. So, still very much optimistic about this team and where they're potentially headed as a club. All right. Let's go ahead and, since we're doing alphabetical order, let's just go ahead and do the Cavs. Obviously, the big addition here has been Donovan Mitchell. My biggest thing is this. If Garland and Mitchell struggle or aren't as effective guarding in the backcourt, puts a lot more pressure on your front court guys, Mobley and Allen. And so ultimately you want to be able to perform at a reasonable level defensively between those two. Especially, you're talking about making playoff runs and being like a Eastern Conference competitor, which, let's pump the brakes on that a little bit, simply because, number one, there's that period of time where, don't forget that Donovan Mitchell ultimately is a scorer in this league. He's going to get his shots. Garland's obviously a skilled facilitator and can kind of, has shown a high ability to be able to, get guys the basketball and be somebody who can keep things going on the offensive end. So I feel good about that. And just in terms of, you look at their front court guys, none of them are high maintenance guys that need the basketball. So those guys can certainly do a good bulk of the scoring. And I don't think it subtracts too much from anybody, because Mobley isn't a high shot attempt guy, and neither is Jared Allen. And Okoro is Okoro. I mean, it's basically to me a corner 3 shooter. So in terms of having enough basketballs to go around to score, I think that'll be fine for me. Again, how well does Garland and Mitchell, how well do they defend night in and night out? I think it's pretty clear that this team's going to be able to score. Even if you look at their bench, having LeVert, Kevin Love, Osman, they'll be able to get a solid amount of scoring off the bench. Neto, there's going to be enough scoring here, bench, starters, to keep things going. Defensively, like I said, in the front court, in the backcourt is where I'm more looking at things and saying, okay, this is the next step. Gel first, get everybody on the same page, get guys comfortable playing with each other, which does take time. But by March, April time, we need to have a defensive identity carved out to try to make the playoff run that people are assuming. And if we're still having struggles in that way, it's tough. Not that it won't happen, because I believe to an extent that it will. But we can't act like Donovan Mitchell being in Utah meant like somehow that they were a great defensive team. Like there were other guys there that took care of that, and Donovan more or less took care. He was able to come in and immediately take care of the 20 points a game that they lost when they lost Gordon Hayward, and that kept things going because he was able to come in basically immediately and not let them fall off too far offensively. So I don't think Cleveland necessarily had anything too much to worry about in terms of, falling off offensively prior to this trade. So for me, again, it just comes down to how well they can guard between Garland and Mitchell, night in and night out. And if they can do reasonably well, we know what Jared Allen's able to do at the rim. We know how switchable Evan Mobley can be. Isaac Okoro was drafted to be a 3-and-D guy. We'll see what kind of step up he takes in his game. So there's things to be optimistic about, but for me, it's a wait and see, just to see like where's this team really going to be come season's end, going into the playoffs. So certainly interested to see how everything plays out in Cleveland. By the way, I mean, they, considering everything that this team has gone through in terms of, everything going on with LeBron and just, the up and down nature of just being in Cleveland as a franchise, winning 50 plus games and then all of a sudden you're not, having, guys like Irving in there, then you don't, and I just, to see how this team has kind of resurrected itself to the point to where we're now talking about them. And I say we, I mean just like the general basketball collective is optimistic that they can make, a finals run at some point, within the next few years, which we'll see. I can't be counted in that group just yet because I want to see what it looks like. But just the fact that people are willing to have that conversation at this stage, I think it says a lot about Kobe Altman and all the guys in the front office, to make all of this happen. And so we'll see what it amounts to. We will absolutely find out what it's going to play out as on the floor. And certainly interesting nonetheless. Let's hop over to Let's think. All right, let's touch on the Mavericks a little bit. Obviously, the big addition here, or I should say, addition, subtraction. Christian Wood being added to the team. Defensively, I don't know how much, it doesn't help them very much. I mean, there was a reason why a lot of teams attacked the Rockets last year, and not to put it all on one player or anything of that nature, but it's not like, Christian Wood was any help in that way. Now, obviously, on a given night, he can get you 10, 12 boards, and he can also step out and shoot the three. He can get you 15, 20 points in the game. So there's production there, sure. And it gives somebody else that for Luka to play off of. And again, you give a guy like that any amount of weapons, and he's going to figure out a way to make it work. And so I don't know, for me, how much more excited I can be about this team than I already kind of was going into the playoffs last year, with how much better they had started to play defensively going into the playoffs. I started to really think that, okay, this team maybe has a chance to get into the finals. So, I mean, that's kind of the peak right now. Like, that's them reaching their peak right now, being at a point where you're in the Western Conference Finals and you're right there looking at the doorstep of the finals. So how much does this team stay on that pace, and how much do they fall off? Because this, could very well be a team that loses in the second round. I don't think they should. I'm not predicting that they will, but it could happen. So it's hard with the variance being what it is. It's hard to allow myself to get to that high again until it's being played out in front of me. Again, for all these teams team defense is really where it boils down to. If you take a step back in terms of team defense, it's hard to play at the highest of high levels. I mean, Milwaukee is very good team defensive wise last year. And, Middleton was out, but for the most part, Giannis was still Giannis. Drew Holiday was playing at a high level. I mean, they had guys that were still playing at a high enough level. It's just at the end of the day, that separator for a lot of these teams ends up being defense. So I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where a Dallas team led by a Luka Doncic or any NBA team led by a Luka Doncic is not going to score, is not going to play at a pace that's somehow going to be advantageous to his skill set. Obviously, I know they don't play at a high pace, but ultimately, because Luka is who he is, he's going to make it work. So there's nothing offensively that I'm too worried about. Christian Wood obviously can, add to that, but defensively is how far do they come at playing the consistency level defensively throughout the season, and how much does that continue to rise as we get further and further into the playoffs like it started to last year, is what I think is really the determinant factor. Again, to me, there's enough of a variance here that, nothing would really shock me. If you told me they got to the Western Conference Finals again, I don't know I'd be shocked. If you told me they got bounced in the second round, I don't know that I'd be shocked. So for me, it just comes down to what do they look like, come playoff time, and what are they doing defensively. So we'll see. It's always a fun team to watch. There's no doubt about that. All right. Let's mentioned Denver a little bit ago, but obviously, we need to see what Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. Michael Porter was just playing in one of the Rico Hines open runs and looked okay. Looked like he's getting his way back. Obviously they add Bruce Brown, which I think Bruce Brown is starting to carve out a nice niche for himself in the NBA in terms of just a big physical NBA player. Doesn't necessarily have to be a guard or a wing or whatever, but just a guy who can kind of play multiple positions and be in multiple spots on the floor and make something happen for you. Outside of that, it really is interesting to see ultimately, what Michael Porter does look like playing around Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. We'll see. Let's see if there's been any recent news. I know Jamal has had some footage out there of him kind of playing in some gym sessions not too long ago. I think ultimately though, you want to see what this team's going to look like with him back as their point guard. So, this day is intense too. Yeah, so he's back to doing 5-on-5s. This was back in July. So we'll see how the timetable continues to improve. Obviously, any setbacks can obviously alter the timetable sometimes significantly. And there's no rush to get him back necessarily. I think this team still is going to be able to vie for, a playoff spot. Especially if Michael Porter's there to take up some of the scoring slack that Jamal would normally take. I don't think there's any question that this team can score. It's just, again, the separator for a lot of teams is how well can you defend. So Denver is certainly a team that can be a tough first round matchup, get to a second round potentially, and then, from there, that's kind of where it is right now. So I can't really say excited, not excited. I'm always happy to see any of these teams play. NBA is NBA, basketball is basketball for me. But as far as like taking that next step, again, you have to see this team fully healthy. You have to see just what healthy means, because guys can always have setbacks or, obviously restrictions and all these different things as you're working your way back into NBA shape, working your way back into playing the grind of an NBA season. And that obviously all takes a lot of time. So season will be here before you know it, and we'll figure out just what Denver's going to look like. KCP's on this team as well now, and so ultimately, like I said, I mean, this is one of those teams that can do damage in your first round, be competitive in the second round, and then just kind of fizzles out from there. And so basically what it boils down to is, where do you take the next step on defense? And scoring is only going to do so much for you to a certain level, and then you get to that top tier level and you start matching up against teams who can shut down a good amount of what you're doing, when they have to. And then next thing you know, you're losing, those 1 to 2, 3 possession games that certain teams can always pull out, at that time of year. And so, yeah, it's, we'll see. All right, let's see. Detroit Pistons. I think for me, among the young players in the league, I think the guy that I'm most excited to see this season is Cade Cunningham. There was rumblings, a lot said, it was kind of his rookie year with people questioning his shot, and then eventually he hit his stride and people kind of shut the fuck up a little bit. You know what I mean? But if you spend any time watching him play prior to coming into the NBA, as I have and as many people have, is that you just knew that ultimately he was going to figure it out. And he's starting to figure it out. And ultimately for me, I think between him, Ivy, there's an interesting piece there that, we'll see ultimately what their front court looks like between Bagley, Stewart, and Jalen Duren. You take a guy like Duren as high as you take him. I would think at some point you may see him play more of the 5 role, and then, is it Bagley or is it Stewart playing, kind of the next front court position. Isaiah Stewart's obviously spent a good amount of time working on his 3-point shot. That much has been evident. So, you can't necessarily have 2 bigs that play around the rim. Jalen Duren's obviously a vertical spacer. So you need more of a guy who can kind of step out and spread the floor a little bit. Is it going to be Bagley? Is it going to be Stewart? I'm talking, long-term big picture. In the immediate time frame that we're talking about, Sadiq Bey, Ivy, Cunningham, and those are going to be basically your three scorers. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for Cade to kind of come in and really take that a big step forward, because there's not a Jeremy Grant there. There's not somebody else who needs shots who ultimately can do offensively what Cade can do. And so I really think that we could see a Cade Cunningham that could give you in the range of 22, 23, 24 points a game. In the same breath, probably give you five rebounds, 5 assists, 6 assists, 7 assists, somewhere in that, 5 to 7 range, and just having a really good season. What happens from there as far as the rest of the guys, like I said, their front court to me is kind of a work in progress depending upon the production you can get there. But Ivy being his rookie season, I don't know how much you can expect there right away. I'm high on Jaden Ivey. I think he has a good shot to be a solid pro. I'm not going to go as far as to say all-star or anything like that just yet, because again, the NBA game is the NBA game. But certainly what he can do in terms of his athleticism, attacking the basket, he's shown improvements in his three, and obviously getting a guy that long and that athletic and that's, that young out in the front court, there's special things that can happen there as well. And Saddiq Bey is obviously carved out a really nice niche for himself as a guy who can score, but he can also stretch the floor for you. So, a lot's going to be put on Bey and Cunningham's shoulders this year, I think, in terms of the scoring load, and I think it's going to be a welcome challenge for Cade. And I think there's going to be some real opportunity to see him take a really big step forward. I really do. Whether he does or whether something happens to where maybe he can't, injury, knock on wood, I'm not wishing or trying to put bad juju in the air, as it were, but, things derail guys. But if nothing happens and he's able to play a reasonably healthy season, I have no reason to suspect that he won't have a really nice year. And that alone is going to be a reason for me to tune into, I should say, Detroit Pistons games. Now, if you start telling me that Jaden Ivey's starting to play out of his mind and Saddiq Bey is, giving you nights where he's hitting 6 threes, that's just icing on the cake. But I'll tune in just to watch Cade Cunningham play. I think he has a chance to be that good coming up this year. All right, so from there, would be a little remiss if I at least didn't mention the champs. Obviously, there's not too much to report here. I mean, JaMychal Green, Dante DiVincenzo, obviously very much Golden State Warriors guys. I just recently did a video where I was kind of looking at Jason Tatum and how much some of these teams were and weren't able to take away his airspace to score in the playoffs. And, one of the things I mentioned was that, he was shooting, talking about Jason Tatum, 44 to 45% throughout the playoffs. And he only did that in 1 out of 6 games against Golden State in the finals. And you start to look at the film as to why that is. And Golden State's just constantly got guys who can switch, who can stand in front of you, who can just, give you a hard time and contest. And DiVincenzo, Green, those are just 2 more guys that are going to add to that. Then you're hopeful that, Kuminga could take a step forward. We'll see what we can get out of James Wiseman. But Kevon Looney's obviously, continues to be a fairly steady rock for them. I mean, I think it's we need to get to a point now where there's a certain level of respect given to Kevon Looney, regardless of what you think of production or whatever. Ultimately, he's switchable and he can rebound, and that's basically what you need out of him in his role. He can do it. Green, Clay, Steph, we know what we're going to get out of Steph, Clay, and Dre. It's just another season. Obviously, there's age to consider, and so those things are always kind of in the back of your mind. But for me, it's about really who ultimately takes a step forward. I think this could be a key year for, Andrew Wiggins, thinking about it, where we can see more of the finals Andrew Wiggins, where he's a guy that gives you, more in that 17, 18 range while also still guarding, your primary best player night in, night out, still shooting the 3 at a relatively high level, still rebounding the ball well. I mean, when you think about it, you think about like third options on teams. And I mean, on some nights he plays well enough to be a second option. I mean, some nights Clay, just struggles to shoot, and maybe now with more of some of the health stuff behind him and a full offseason, maybe we'll see more of the scoring Klay Thompson that we're used to seeing. The defense just isn't quite there like it used to be. And so that's, there's going to be spots where guys take a step back. But ultimately, I think Andrew Wiggins is like a perfect complement to a Klay Thompson. Just a perfect complement. If he's just not able to do the things he used to do night in and night out, Andrew Wiggins can fill that gap just enough to where if Klay gives you even just the shooting that you need from him still going to be enough to be very competitive and probably win more often than not. That's just how important Andrew Wiggins has become for this team in my eye, and I think the finals really highlighted it. And if you hadn't paid attention to him enough because, you felt some type of way about his time in Minnesota, or you felt some type of way about his contract extension, or you just felt like, well, this guy's not doing enough. Blah, blah. Look, he's found his role with the right team in the right situation, and I think this is where you really start to see him thrive. People wanted to say what they said about him, being an all-star this past year, but you know what? If you watch the finals and you watched it closely, that dude was an all-star level player last year. Period. Just was. And you could not like it, that's fine, but ultimately, that dude, I think, is a perfect complement to Klay Thompson, who, again, if he's not able to give you night in and night out what you hope for, I think Andrew Wiggins fills it in nicely and could even turn into being more of a second option when he really has to be. What steps forward Jordan Poole takes, Kuminga takes, Moses Moody takes, we'll see. Obviously, we know what Jordan Poole can do offensively as a scorer, creating his own shot. Dante DiVincenzo has been a solid defender, good rebounding guard, a guy who can stretch the floor for you as a 3. Will compete and just play hard. Kuminga, we obviously know what the upside is there. Moses Moody, we know what the upside is there. So there's a lot of potential mixed with a lot of proven production. And that's what continues to keep this Golden State Warriors engine running. And I don't see any reason for it to stop, barring any serious injury. And, this team just knows who they are. And you look at that finals, you go back and you watch the finals. There's no doubt that they have a defensive identity, and there's no doubt that they ultimately know what they need to do offensively. They know ultimately that Steph's going to be Steph, and, these guys are eventually going to figure out where their role needs to be within a particular game. Clay's gonna make shots. Andrew's gonna eventually be at a point where he's just, I think the mentality that he has now too, with the fact that he just understands, talking about Andrew Wiggins, just understanding that, I'm an elite glue guy who can do anything. Just let me play basketball. I can do anything. You need me to rebound that? I'll go get that. You need me to guard that guy? I'll go guard that guy. And I think it's a great spot for him to be in. And it's good timing for Golden State because, again, if Klay just can't always be Klay, which is understandable. It's 2 ACLs. It's that's a lot for anybody. Steph's getting older. Draymond's getting older. So to have a guy like that, to have some of this young talent that can kind of pick up some of the slack too, again, I know I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, but it's hard not to be optimistic about Golden State, at least going into another season. From Golden State, let's hop on over to the Houston Rockets. Look, this is going to be a young team. I think anybody can get excited about it, assuming you love basketball. If you're just a casual fan or you just want to watch top-tier teams play, you may not always be excited night on night out by what these guys do, but on a personal level, being a guy who's seen a majority of these guys from a young age, I tend to fall more into tune with the younger teams to see how they develop, especially when it's more guys who are drafted by that particular team more so than picked up in free agency or a trade or what have you. Houston, with Jalen Green, Jabari Smith being picked up in this past draft, Şengün, Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, Tari Eason, who, by the way, Eason's easily going to be my favorite rookie to watch this year, so that alone is going to give me reason to tune into the Rockets. I really hope they don't have plans to put him in the G League at all. I don't see a reason for them to, and I think he could come in pretty quickly and at least play his role, off the bench and be productive in a variety of different ways. So hopefully I'll be able to tune in to Rockets games and actually see him in a Rockets uniform more often than not. I don't have any inside details on that other than my personal beliefs on whether or not he should spend time in the G League, which I don't think he should or needs to. But, I'm looking forward to seeing, the evolution of what Jalen Green does with his offensive game. Jabari Smith kind of starting to get a little bit of feel, obviously year one, keeping that in mind, a little bit of a feel of what he could potentially take shape as, over the next 3 to 5 years as an NBA player. Here's how I would more or less frame Jabari Smith to you. If I told you that he was going to be a guy who could shoot, let's say 37, 38% from three, gave you in the range of around 17 a game, 7 boards, and was the most switchable defender that the Rockets have. And, obviously I think Tari Eason could eventually, evolve into that when he becomes a starter. But let's say he's, at least in the top 1 or 2 and makes the team better defensively with the switchability. If I told you that was the player you were going to get in the next 5 years, how excited would you be? Versus the assumption of, well, here was a guy that was being projected, number 1. Are you going to be the person or the fan that is somehow feels let down? Because if I tell you that he gives you what I just said, he'll get, he could give you, and he does that over, a 4-year stretch, signs, an extension, stays with the team, and he does that over, an 8 to 10 year stretch with the team. Obviously in today's free agency, nothing's a given how long guys stay anymore. But point being, if you could see that sort of evolution from him within his first rookie contract, how happy would you be? Or would you be let down because, again, you think you potentially got the number 1 overall pick in this draft at number 3? And the expectations you have for that are, that he needs to be an all-star level player. I would take the option I laid out because I think that's probably more so what it could be. And if it turns out to be that, I actually think that's something to be happy about in terms of, being able to get him at 3 and having a guy who can have an impact at both ends of the floor. And look, I really believe in his shooting ability. I believe in his ability to switch. And if those 2 things are kind of the bedrock by which he is able to build an NBA career, I think he's going to do just fine. Now, again, if you're going to come at it from a expectation that you're getting an all-world player, an all-star level player, who dropped you at 3, you may be among the swath of people who believe that, he wasn't what he was projected or hyped as being. Which, amongst circles that I run in, I don't ever really remember anybody hyping Jabari Smith. I think everybody felt a certain way about him as far as, the level of player he could be. And, he's certainly a modern, stretch big. Obviously, he needs to put size on and whatnot, but a lot of these guys coming into the league, that's first and foremost physically, is being able to attack the game physically, and obviously the game's got to slow down for you mentally, so there's a lot of work to be done there. But day one, you're impacted, for a lot of these guys are impacted physically. So, that's where I would pose Jabari Smith for those of you who may be trying to figure out now that we're approaching the season, well, what can we expect? I'm not saying that what I just laid out for you is what he's going to give you day one, season 1, but I'm saying within his rookie contract, if he kind of gave you that sort of production, could reliably, stretch the floor, at a high clip, because again, I just think that's where his shot can be. And then you add in Eason, who I think is going to be. I can't imagine there's going to be a bigger steal in this draft. I really can't. I really can't. I very well could be wrong, and trust me, I've been wrong plenty of times before, but I certainly believe that this guy has it. And then beyond that, Michael Porter Jr. Wow. Kevin Porter Jr. Ultimately, just how much more of a step can he take in his game? Look, I don't think there's ever been question, or at least there shouldn't be, as to the offensive upside he can have. Of course, you can question his shot and whatnot, but ultimately, this is a guy that knows how to get his shot, has the skill and ability to get his shot, and ultimately it's going to be up to him to be more efficient. And, as time evolves, where I've always loved Kevin Porter is just his ability to create and pass. So if he can become the guy who can essentially run your team, but can also create his own shot, isn't a detriment to you by taking bad shots or ill-timed shots or ill-advised shots, as it were, and can really just run the team. Let Jalen Green be more of the scorer night in and night out, making sure Jabari Smith's getting the right looks for what his skill set is, making sure Sengun is, getting the touches, inside in the dunker area and even as a stretch big that he needs, and then ultimately, creating your own offense around that when and where needed. I still really think that Kevin Porter has a nice bit of upside left to him. Not that I expect him to turn into anything crazy. I'm not going to, throw out stats or anything like that to where I think he's going to eventually be, but I definitely think that, there's a decent amount of upside still left that we haven't seen, that when he starts to get more into that groove, it can certainly evolve into more of a fit. So, there's some nice young talent here. There is. And I'm certainly interested to tune in to watch this team simply just off the young talent and to seeing what they do alone. So yeah, I certainly think that this is, as they say, a league pass team that you can certainly be interested in watching. If I lived in the Houston area and had access to watching Rockets games, there's going to be losing streaks and there's going to be, tough times, but ultimately I think this is going to be a fun team to watch. And, if you have access to watching their games because you live within the broadcast area, I certainly encourage you to do it because, I expect some exciting things out of this team. All right, let's wander on over to the Indiana Pacers, picking up, Halliburton, into the fold. There've been questions about, Miles Turner, if he was going to get traded during the offseason. They've got Buddy Hield now, and, a little surprised, honestly, that Sacramento didn't decide to stick with Halliburton, but, it's not like they didn't get a quality player back in Sabonis. Now, how much Sabonis moves the needle for them, we'll have to see, but, I don't know that it moves it so much to where they become a playoff contender in the West, but, for me, this opportunity that Halliburton has with the Pacers, the sky's the limit because ultimately there's nothing here really to hinder him. Buddy Hield obviously needs his shots, but there's really nobody else within the makeup of this team that keeps Tyrese Halliburton from being whatever he can be night in and night out. So seeing his evolution night in, night out and what his production can be, I certainly think there's a lot of value in to tune in to watch that. But I don't necessarily outright predict that this team's going to be in the running for a playoff spot. I think it's just going to get tougher and tougher with how the East has continued to evolve. Teams are going to be jockeying at the top, which is eventually going to push some of those teams that would be 4 or 5, maybe down to 6, and then that ultimately puts the teams that would have been 5, 6, 7 down a spot potentially. So we'll have to see just how well Indiana can respond in terms of keeping up with the talent evolution of the Eastern Conference. And then, of course, any of these guys get injured, it's kind of slim pickings in terms of what they can bring off the bench and keep a certain level of production. So I'm excited to see what Halliburton's going to do. I think there's plenty of opportunity and growth for him to show his complete package with this team. Something that may not have been, an option for him in Sacramento, given that De'Aaron Fox was going to have the ball in his hands and whatnot. So yeah, from that perspective, I certainly am looking forward to seeing what Halliburton does this upcoming season. All right. Well, given the spirit of alphabetical order, let's jump over to the team that's gotten quite a bit of conversation over the off season, and that is the LA Clippers. As I mentioned at the top of the podcast, certainly excited to see some of these Rico Hines runs, specifically the ones that featured Paul George, and eventually we got to see John Wall, and seeing him get to a point where he's getting his confidence back. Certainly has been working on his shot over the period of time that he's been out. Paul George looks like he's back to where he needs to be to kind of keep things going. Now, obviously, there's a lot of questions about how much on the floor Wall, George, Leonard, we know fully healthy, peak potential what these guys have done throughout their career. Wall's been an all-star. George has been an all-star. Kawhi Leonard's obviously been an all-star. So that alone is interesting. I think where the part for me that's really interesting is now that you have John Wall in the fold, obviously barring any sort of injuries or whatnot, I mean, you've got an interesting bench in LA between Reggie Jackson, Norman Powell, Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Terrence Mann, Luke Kennard. There's just a lot of guys here that can add some real quality depth. So I think where their advantage can be outside of the three guys that is going to be at the top of the marquee is really just the depth that this team can stay and play with, at varying points of the game. But I think that can be certainly a differentiator for them night in and night out, as even on nights where Paul might have to take a rest or Kawhi might need to take a rest or both of them are taking a rest or, John's, maybe taking some time, just for precautionary situations. I mean, that's the situation you're dealing with Wall, George, and, Kawhi Leonard. There's going to be this preventative maintenance, we'll say. It's going to be necessary. I mean, you have these three guys with the hopes that things obviously, play out really well. These guys, playing at the highest level that they can play at this point in their career, and you're able to see that for a good chunk of the season. That's the hope. Now the reality is, as we all know, watching these guys, there's injury concerns, there's load management concerns, and just what all that entails. But I think where the Clippers are going to be able to be okay is the fact that they do have depth behind these guys. Now, obviously, you're not going to just outright replace these guys in terms of production, but you're bringing in guys who have starter quality to them. I mean, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, Norman Powell, Robert Covington. These guys have started in the league, so it's not like you're just bringing off any old body. And, to see what Terrence Mann has been able to do in terms of his production, even Amir Coffey at some junctures. This is an interesting team, for sure. And I think it's more interesting to me off the bench more than anything. And what I really think, obviously, we're going to be able to test that when, some of these guys end up having to, take a night off, for preventative measures, what have you. And so I think that's where the value is going to show through, and I think that's what makes them exciting. Obviously, we all want to see, nobody goes to a movie to watch the previews, but we all know that sometimes you can go watch some of these big blockbuster movies and see some really good previews. And so I think the previews are going to be, in some cases, a quality viewing when you compare it to the movie that you're there to see. So I think that's what makes the Clippers interesting this year, at least for me. All right, let's hop over from the LA Clippers to, of course, the LA Lakers. look, I'm interested in this team for a number of reasons. Social media, ha-has aside, what ultimately is Russell Westbrook in 22-23? Just how much of that tenacity bleeds over into the team in a positive way from Patrick Beverley? How much time can Anthony Davis, stay on the floor and be, present on this team week in, week out, month in, month out? I'm excited for Thomas Bryant being able to work his way back into an NBA situation and hopefully resume where he left off before his injury, because he was certainly carving out a nice niche for himself in Washington. It was a shame that he's spent the amount of time he's had to spend out simply because of where his trajectory was taking him. I've always said that, when I was scouting at the high school level, especially when I started scouting the high school circuit, the shoe circuit, I didn't see too many guys run the floor or play harder than Thomas Bryant. So I've always been a fan of him just from that standpoint. So I'm hoping good things for him for sure. Kendrick Nunn, there's a big question mark there as well. Austin Reeves, I think, is certainly on his way to continue to carve out even more of a role. I think the positive sign there is more of the team is starting to believe in him, or has started to believe in him, or and that in itself makes it a fun watch from that standpoint. They bring Juan Toscano-Anderson over from the Warriors, and a switchable big who can stretch the floor a little bit for you. And then you look at some of these other pieces they've added: Troy Brown Jr., Lonnie Walker. And how much do they give you night in, night out? So, it's difficult, right? Because ultimately, we've seen a good chunk of this already in terms of what Russ could potentially look like as a Laker. We know ultimately what LeBron is capable of night in, night out, but Anthony Davis, how many games is he available for? It's hard to discount him because of his talent, but at the same point in time, the best ability is availability, as they say, and if you're just not able to play, then it's tough. There's such a variance with this team, or at least potential-wise, that it's tough to pin anything down and say it's definitely going to be this or that. I think ultimately, is Russ still with this team come, trade deadline? What are the internal factors that end up taking place out onto the court? It's just, and a lot of that is created through the fan base and media and just talking points in general and expectations. And I think really what you have to do, especially if you're a fan of the team, is strip any expectations and just let it be what it is. Because ultimately, that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be what it is, night in, night out. And, the sometimes sad part of it is here you've got a guy who's just, arguably the greatest guy to ever do it. And for some of you, it's inarguable. And yet, there's only a certain ceiling that you can reach on your own before the team has to really do their part. So, I don't want to pretend to know what's going on in Russ's head and how he feels about the situation. There's obviously been recent reports that he will show up to a LeBron mini camp and be ready for the start of training camp and whatnot. Ultimately, you're in the league long enough, you just understand you have to be a pro through a lot of the rumors, all the things that are said in the media amongst the fan base. A lot of it is just noise, and then some of it obviously makes its way to you, and you can obviously get a collective feel for what's being said out there. And ultimately, you just have to kind of say, fuck all that and just play your game. but at the same point in time, you're human, and there's parts of it too that, start to bleed into your psyche to a degree of potentially making you, think and feel a certain way, as it were, towards a situation, maybe more so than your game. Because obviously, look, Russell Westbrook, we can't sit here and pretend like we haven't known what Russell Westbrook has been his entire career. He's been an MVP level player. He's been an all NBA level player. He's been an all-star. These are not easy things for anybody to achieve, let alone to the consistency that he has from the start of his career up to a certain point. And, I think ultimately you have to hope that guys will eventually take on a role that suits them. And if they just can't because it just doesn't fit them, or it's just not where they want to be or how they want to play, then you got to do what you got to do as an organization. But, all he can do as a player is play his game. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, he should do this, he should do that, he should pass more, he should have learned to shoot more and this and that and third. But, here's the thing. So many people lauded him for being this generational athlete that we may never see again at the point guard spot. Everybody loved the highlights of him dunking on people and just being this just locomotive of a player at 6'3". And then all of a sudden now it's not good enough because you wanted him to be something else, or you need him to be something else so that your team can win. But ultimately, you end up in these spots with some of these players where you're asking them to accept something that maybe they don't feel they need to, or they don't want to, and you feel like, well, you should. And I would just put it to you like this. There are some of you out there that are very talented and they're being underutilized at your own job. And somebody could say to you, well, there are a lot of people out here that don't have a job right now, so you ought to be happy you have one. Just go to work every day, put your head down, do what they need you to do, and be a quality team player. Okay, but at the same point in time, once I've kind of done that, what's next? And some of you are saying, well, he hasn't done that yet, so we're not there. And it's like, okay, fair enough. But when you've already played at a certain level the way he has, and let's say he does just outright accepts his role, becomes more of an assist guy, and just, can just find his offense where it's convenient, not take, shots that just don't fit his wheelhouse, and he just facilitates more than anything. Facilitates, rebounds, and then just finds his spots in transition, maybe, takes advantage of some switches, and can drive to the rim and use some of the athleticism that he still has left to a certain degree. Okay, if he does that. But then a guy like that is looking and saying, well, what's next? Now, in order for the answer to be, well, this is your role, this is it, well, then you got to be winning. So if this team's winning and he's playing a certain way and it's working and the team's getting dubs, right? Things are going well, guys are playing well, everybody's happy and all that. Makes it a little bit easier, I would assume. I've never been in an NBA locker room like that. I'm not in these guys' heads, but I'm just thinking as a human for a second. If at some point you say to yourself, okay, it's working. Like the way I'm playing right now is working. Everything's good to go. We're winning. Cool. But if he does the things that you all want him to do, and they're still losing, then what's next? I'm not asking who's to blame. I'm saying to you, what's next? Because a guy like that has always had an answer. There's always been that next level up. And some of you may say in response, well, that's where he's at in his career. There's no next level up. It's time to accept your role. Okay. But at the same point in time, you have come from this, you've come from a rarefied air of guys who have played amongst the elite of the elite and succeeded. And now you're saying, well, can't do that anymore. But in their mind, they can. When they work out, they can. When they look across at some young guy who has happy feet standing in front of him trying to contain him and he still blows by him. These things happen and you're thinking to yourself, except what? Play less than what? You know? So I don't know. I think for me, where I'm at with it is that you should have fucking known what you were asking for when you got him. And if you didn't, you either assumed that putting on the purple and gold just makes everything work out just because it's supposed to, or you're fucking delusional. Because ultimately, I'm not buying a Prius and expecting it to run like a fucking Ferrari. And vice versa. I'm not buying a Ferrari hoping that it's going to be gas, fuel efficient. Gotta know what you got. So, ultimately, whatever Russell Westbrook is able to produce before whatever happens, a trade, whatever. I think looking back at it and even looking at it in the present tense, you had to have known what you asked for. And I'm not going to, and this is where not holding any specific fandom always works for me. All I care about is seeing the best version of every player that I watch. Best game. And yes, guys do need to evolve and grow into roles, obviously. I think the best example of that, and I mentioned it earlier, was Andrew Wiggins, during the finals this year. So happy to see that he's now playing at a potential in a role with a team that it just works. And yeah, it's Golden State. I get all that. But bottom line is, you like to be able to see guys use as much of their talent and their confidence. And when you can mix the two and guys can be playing in a role that the two mesh well, the confidence and the skill, it's an awesome thing to watch. I hope that happens for Russell Westbrook. I do. Because I've always enjoyed watching him. And we can sit here and pick apart, well, he should do this. And that's all well and good. But ultimately, you knew what you were signing up for. And if you didn't, that's your fault. And when I say you, I'm talking about those of you who have expectations or tweet mean shit that he'll never read or whatever. It's useless. It really is. All right. Let's move on from Russell Westbrook. I'm never... It's been a long time since I've never not been interested in what the Lakers could do on the court. I want to see a healthy Anthony Davis. I like seeing LeBron just play at a crazy level at his age. I don't even want to say his age. Like, I just love watching him play at a crazy level. I don't give a fuck where you rank him or what you think of him or whatever. I just love watching him do what he's capable of doing night in, night out. I'm excited to see what Thomas Bryant can bring, coming off an injury. Excited to see kind of what Patrick Beverley and what his dog mentality can bring to a team. Hoping to see some nice positive things out of Lonnie Walker off the bench. Trey Brown Jr., who I've always thought was a talented kid. Love to see him eventually, carve out some minutes for himself and see what that could look like. And of course Austin Reeves. He's earned the attention he's been getting in terms of the fan base talking about him and being excited about him and all that. So I think ultimately, where people need to evolve is getting off of the easy talking points. It's easy to look, but you know what? There were those of you who were excited to get Russell Westbrook, by the way. Oh yeah, we're adding another guy. Now some of you are like, well, I wasn't. Okay. But you still hoped it worked out. Of course you did. You could sit here and say, well, I knew. Okay. But you still hoped it worked out. And ultimately, he's still on the team. He's still putting on a purple and gold jersey. So, my hope is that it does start to work out. Do I expect it to? I don't know. I really don't. I think it comes down to what Russell is ultimately, what ultimately he's capable of doing at this stage in his career. I don't think an NBA player takes a floor and necessarily wants to lose. Now, yeah, there's those situations where guys have checked out and all that stuff. I certainly don't hope that's the case for Russell. But I also hope that the team can evolve together and play it at a level where, if healthy, this team can certainly open some eyes and start to do some things. Again, it's too much of a variance for me to pin anything down to just say, well, it's going to look terrible. LeBron could start to come play out of his mind like we expect. Anthony Davis could be more healthy than we're, hoping for. Russ could, eventually find a nice little middle ground between what he wants to do and the player he wants to be and what he needs to be. These things could happen. Sounds pie in the sky, right? I get it. But same point in time, you got to leave that certain level of variance, because ultimately, especially if you're a fan of the team, what else are you going to do? Complaining about it's not going to do anything, and then what are you going to trade him for? 30 cents on the dollar? How much better do you become then? The answer is you don't become much better, if better at all. So you really do need to hope that this shit works out to some degree. But it's certainly not going to work out in the framework of let's just talk shit and bully our way into hoping that he'll become. No. Doesn't work that way. Not when you've played at a level he's played at. As I say that, the thing I think back to is, when Carmelo was in that press conference and they were asking him, would you be coming off willing to come off the bench? And he's like, me? You talking about me? Bro, this dude hadn't come off the bench maybe ever. Now, of course, he's come off the bench, but, point being, again, you got to eventually evolve into that. It's more than reading the writing on the wall. It is saying to yourself, do I love the game more and playing at the highest level I can play at, or do I love what I can do and maximizing for as long as I can what I can do? It's really what it boils down to. And do you feel like you're doing it in the right situation? Right? Do you want to be there? Is that the team you want to do it for? We'll find out. But yeah, per usual, another talking head spends too much time talking about the Lakers, so let's move on to my favorite NBA team. Now, I do not have a team I root for, but I damn sure have teams that I like watching. And so, if you know your ABCs, as we talked about, going in alphabetical order here, you know that after the Lakers, we get into the M's. And the first M is Memphis Grizzlies. Now look, one paramount reason I love this team and will always love this team, one reason I love this team, by and large, is that it has always been built through the draft. And I'll be damned if every year I'm not excited to see who this team drafts. Every year. I don't give a damn what year it is. Last year, they get Jake LaRavia from Wake Forest. They go and get David Roddy, Colorado State. And ultimately, I think this is just a team that is just figured out, ironically enough, in the way in which, and not to forget Kenny Lofton Jr., right? But in the way in which that this team has built itself, it reminds me, to a degree, of what Golden State has done. Not in terms of personnel, right? John, Desmond Bane are not the Splash Brothers, although Desmond's a hell of a shooter. Dylan Brooks is not the same level of shooter, but just the point of young dudes go out, play their game, and they're just going to continue to evolve before your eyes. And that shit is exciting. There wasn't a series I gave a damn more about than watching Golden State and Memphis. And you know what? They gave a damn about it too. Doesn't matter if it was Clay calling back to the Jaren Jackson Jr. tweet, strength in numbers in the finals press conference. Doesn't matter if it's the shit that Jal tweet, just calling back to, we got unfinished business. That type of energy. All of it is fucking exciting. You know why? Because it has the feel of rivalry, right? Like, these are teams that, Memphis can beat Golden State, and we know Golden State can obviously beat a lot of teams, pretty much every team in the league. Watching a team get built through the draft, and teams are starting to finally catch on to it because the contracts are just getting so fucking expensive. Like, if you suck at the draft year in and year out, you are truly doing yourself a disservice. I don't give a damn how deep the draft is or isn't. It's your job to find the guys that fit your team. It really is. It's your job to build out your depth. And yeah, you're sometimes going to draft a guy you're excited about, you think's a hit, and you get 3-4 years down the road, and it's just not what you thought it was going to be. But ultimately, in order to effectively draft or pick up guys in free agency and build out your team, you have to know who you are. And it feels like, Memphis knows who they are. And that's the cool part to me, is that when you've done the hard part of figuring out who are we and who's going to lead us and who are our guys, once you figure out that piece of it, which takes a while, it's not easy. But once you're able to get there and hit your stride a little bit, then yeah, you can start to really look around. You think about it. Like, when you first started learning to drive, at least this was true for me, you think about, like, you get behind the wheel and you're not, like, taking it, the stuff going on around you. You're not looking at, billboards or what stores you're driving by or the scenery. Maybe you live in a mountainous area. You're not always taking that stuff in early on because you're so dialed in on driving. Maybe you got your parents sitting next to you and they're stressing you out because they want you to drive correct and not fucking get in an accident and all this other shit. But when you finally learn to start driving and you start to get some comfort behind it, driving becomes, something you can enjoy doing. Now, there's certain drives none of us want to make. We don't want to go drive to work, and I get that. But the point is, when you get to a point where things are where you understand exactly, pretty much what you're doing, you can take more of it in. And it feels like, as a young team, they've already figured out who they are, what their identity is. They've accepted the dark side role, right? And yet they can just enjoy shit now. Like, they can enjoy each other, which obviously adds to the camaraderie of that team, which obviously bleeds out onto the floor and how they play for each other. And then you just get to see kind of the evolution. And they see it, in 2020. We don't see it in 2020. They see it in 2020 vision. We don't get as clear of a view because we're not there every day and, for practices, or we're not in the locker room and these things. But when you can see it in 2020 like they can, like, that viewpoint has got to be the funnest fucking thing I can think of when it comes to your team coming together. So, point I'm making is that there's never not going to be a point that I don't want to sit down and watch this team. Like, they're just fun. They have like a college feel to them, but they go out and play for one another. They talk some shit. They back it up. There's still some growing pains. There's still losses that they've got to learn from and grow through, and all that, all that wonderful maturation, stuff that you hear about in sports, team sports. But ultimately, the hard part of knowing who your guys are and what you're all capable of and all that, like, that part has been figured out. Not saying 100%, but to know you already got Ja, Desmond, Dylan, obviously, Jaren Jackson Jr., like, you've got guys that you can eventually build around. Maybe some of these guys won't be in the fold long term, depending upon what trade options are out there, what free agency options are out there. But ultimately, for right now, today, you know who you're moving forward with and who you're going into battle with, to the point to where these guys can enjoy playing with each other. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what goes on in their locker room and how much these guys do or don't love each other. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing on the court, and I'm not seeing a team that doesn't like playing with each other. But in any case, as a viewer, right, lover of the game aside, just as a viewer, like, it's hard not to like watching Memphis. Now, I get it. If you're a fan of a certain team, whatever. But ultimately, if you can strip that shit away, okay, if you really can, and you can just appreciate basketball for its roots, go out there with your 5 guys, talk some shit, score, win, play your ass off. Go out and make basketball plays and play your ass. This is that type of a team. This is a very of the roots basketball team that I can just enjoy watching. It's fun, man. Just fucking is. So anyway, that aside, let's go from Memphis to Miami. A little bit better scenery in Miami. Joking aside. All right. Look, you're dealing with a team that damn near made the finals. Shot away from making the finals. I think for me the biggest 2 questions is, what's Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson going to look like this year? How much does it really matter what Duncan Robinson looks like at this point, which is kind of sad to say because it's hard to put him out there defensively, and then, the shot at home is better than the shot on the road or vice versa, and, it's just, there's that. And then you've got guys behind you like Victor Oladipo, who signed a contract extension. Gabe Vincent's played well. Tyler Hero's obviously very much a part of the fold. Caleb Martin. I mean, there's other options, behind him that's like, well, if we can't put you out there defensively, then just what it is. We're going to move on, and we're just going to continue to win. Look, I think for me, there's nothing to get too high or too low about. That Miami Heat for a while now have been what they are. That there's a certain expectation. That's why you see Kyle Lowry getting in shape and looking like the best shape of his career. You hope that he can stay, without too much injury, during the course of a season, and see just how much he can potentially give you. Do I ever expect him to be Toronto Raptors Kyle Lowry again? Probably not with this team, because you're not going to just solely have the ball in your hands and be looking to come up and be the initiator or the guy who decides when he's going to take a 3. Like, there's more consideration here. You have to, damn sure have to consider Jimmy Butler, and you have to consider Bam Adebayo. And then you've got other shooters around you who are better shooters. So I don't necessarily know that at any point we're ever going to see old Kyle Lowry, but I don't necessarily know that matters. I mean, ultimately, what you need is going to be a low turnover game manager who can knock down open threes and essentially can, be a smart rotational team defender. They don't need look. There's some teams. There's a number of teams that their best player has to be their point guard. The Miami Heat are not that team. Kyle Lowry doesn't have to be whoever their lead guard is. That doesn't need to be their best player. Their best player can be Jimmy Butler, and I think I'd probably be more comfortable with that being the case anyway. I'm not clamoring. If I'm a Miami Heat fan, I'm not clamoring for them to get the best point guard possible. Now, obviously, there's certain guys, but the possibility of you getting them, is slim to none. Very few guys. I understand that we're in a day and age where guys are asking for trades and guys get moved, and it's more frequent than it's ever been. Whatever. But for the most part, the guys that you would look to before you look to Jimmy Butler, night in, night out, those guys aren't going to become available very often. So ultimately, you want to give Lowry the best shooting options. Give him an alpha like Jimmy. Bam can be whatever Bam's going to... of course, you want him to give you consistent production. But you're asking him to be the best two-way version of it, possible. Right? Because you know what he can do defensively. You know what he can do as a passer, and he's, a good to very good, depending upon the night, rebounder. And then you also want him to give you 20 points in a game. Something among those things is going to have to give. And I think most nights it's going to be whatever you think his expectation of his points needs to be. I think if you can live with him being a guy who can be your best, your best defender, more often than not your best rebounder, and then being a guy who can get you 15, 17 a game, while Jimmy and some of the other shooters take advantage of the opportunities that they have. Because that's really what this team's going to boil down to, right? I'm not expecting Jimmy Butler to necessarily be a knockdown 3-point shooter. I know he can be a 3-level scorer, but ultimately I'm not expecting him to be an all-world 3-point shooter. It's obviously what they paid Duncan Robinson for, but you figured out he can't keep him on the floor long enough to win playoff games. So ultimately, it's going to be the points in Miami are going to be done by committee. Jimmy's going to have his big nights, and I know for some fans they were hoping that Kyle Lowry could be the guy in some of those other nights, but I don't think that's necessarily going to happen night in, night out. Just don't. I think where you need to evolve to if you're a Miami Heat fan is that points are going to come by committee. And there are certain things we expect. We expect Jimmy Butler to be a dog. Well, what does that mean? We expect him to be the absolute best fucking player he can be every night. Same thing for Bam, although we can't necessarily count on him to give us 20 to 25 a night. He's probably going to live sub 20 most nights. It's probably going to be more in the 15 to 17 range every night. But if he can go out and grab you 8 to 10 rebounds, and if he can still be, your best overall defender, cool. Some of you are saying, well, he can't stretch the floor. Okay, well, but that's not his archetype. That's not who he's ever been. Wasn't that in high school? Wasn't that at Kentucky? Mid-range and down. It's where we're at. But he's a skilled passer, rotates well. He's always going to, more often than not, be in a good spot defensively for you. And he's going to anchor that defense for you. So I think it's really just about being able to alter the mindset of what are we expecting here. Look, again, you're one shot away from making the finals. Now, as we've mentioned, or as I've mentioned throughout this podcast, the East is obviously getting stronger. So there's going to be a lot more pushback. But ultimately, again, the value Miami's always had is that they know exactly who they are, what they were expected to be, and that comes top down, right? So we know this team's going to be stout more often than not defensively, and we know that there shouldn't be anybody on this team that's expecting to do or be more than what they've already been doing. Jimmy should know he's pretty much the guy. Bam should know what's expected of him. And ultimately, everybody else basically has to play their role at the best that they can play it at. Whether it's Victor, whether it's Tyler, whether it's Caleb, Martin, whether it's Max Strus, and whether it's Duncan Robinson eventually finding his way back into what you were hoping he was going to be. Knockdown, stretch big, but then ultimately knowing that the defense just isn't going to be there for a lot of matchups, sadly. But this is still very much a quality and tough team. You want Kyle out there to be able to kind of guide the offense, knock down open shots, be a smart rotational team defender. I think if you can let the expectations live kind of where I've lined them out and not expecting Bam to be 20 and 10 every night while also still being, one of the best defenders in the league, and expecting Jimmy to give you 25 a night and just save you at every turn, and expecting Kyle Lowry to start to look more like, Toronto Kyle Lowry. Like, managing expectations, if you're a Heat fan, is paramount. So I think if you can do that and be happy with the fact that this team's culture has always demanded a lot defensively as a team, and they've more often than not always gotten it, and then you've got enough quality players, quality NBA players, who can figure out the rest for you. If you can live with that, and you can understand that Kyle may not exactly be what you were hoping for when he came to Miami. Some of you are saying, well, I knew that. Okay, good for you. Gold star for you. But again, if you can manage that expectation with him, understand that, Jimmy's being asked to do a lot night in and night out, and he's just going to give you whatever he can give you. And then Bam is Bam. I understand that you need more out of him than what you got at certain points in the playoffs. I get all that. But at the same point in time, you may not get it every time. And then you may. There might be a series where he's just, just playing well. And when I say, when I'm really talking about these teams, I don't give, too much of a fuck about the regular season. Regular season's fun and all, but it's receding. Ultimately, you're looking at these teams from a standpoint of where can you take us in the playoffs. And I still think Miami has done the job of putting together a team that's a modern NBA team that's got a lot of nice pieces to it that can do their job. That's really that's what you need. You need your 1 through 9, your 1 through 8 to do their fucking job. Period. Accept your role, do your job. That's been Miami Heat culture. So, do I think it's going to deviate from that coming into the next season? I don't. And so, ultimately, I think you're in a good spot if you're a Miami Heat fan for sure. All right, let's jump over. I need to start wrapping this up here. All right. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go. Let me think here. Let me think. Is there really anything I need to touch on with the Bucks? No, I think I'm good there. Sorry, Bucks fans. I mean, it's just, I don't really think there's too much to really touch on it. It's like, well, you just spent all that time talking about Miami. You really didn't do it. Yeah, well, there's still some talking points there. I mean, I could sit here and tell you I'm hopeful that Middleton, comes back completely healthy. That's all well and good. But, I mean, how much is Giannis going to evolve? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be much. He's going to be who he is. Drew had an awesome season last year. I hope that continues for him. And look, I mean, at the end of the day, this is still going to be a good team. Bobby Portis is back on an extension. I expect this team to kind of continue to run on the cylinders they've run on. There's not much variance here. Or like for Miami, there was some variance. Like there could be a better version of Kyle Lowry. There could be a slightly better offensive version of Bam in the playoffs. You could see an evolution in some of these guys like a Max Strus or some of these other guys that were coming off the bench. So the point being is like, I think you can look to a man in Milwaukee and just understand that there's an area in which all these guys live in terms of their upside, their floor, and whatnot. So I think for me, I still expect Milwaukee to be a contending team in the East, and I think that's kind of where you let that live. All right, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Minnesota. I definitely want to start getting into some more film on the fit of Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. Obviously, Karl is, an exceptional stretch big, especially for his size. So you don't necessarily have to be in these situations where you've got two traditional bigs who are, who are clogging up the lane. And obviously the knock for a long time on Karl Anthony Towns is he just doesn't guard the paint or the rim well enough. Well, now you kind of take that out with Rudy Gobert. I think for me, the better talking points, honestly, is what's the next step for Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards? Like, if you're somebody who loves Anthony Edwards and you're saying, like, this guy can be an MVP level player, well, when? Like, is it going to be, are we going to see it now? Like, and I'm with you on that, just so we're clear. But when? Are we going to start seeing it next year? Are we going to, is it going to be, in 2 years? What time frame are we working at? So I'm excited to see him from that standpoint of, are we really going to start to see potentially that going into next season? Jaden McDaniel, obviously there was some nice little buzz during the the pickup game, pro-am portion of the summer where, there was obviously some games that Jaden McDaniels played in that, people got excited about. And look, Jaden McDaniels has always been a skilled player. Skilled in high school, could shoot it, could handle it, could drive it, and at the NBA level, like, certain things start to go away, right? Like, in high school and college, the thing that may not be a big help to you at the NBA level is still a great asset at the high school and college level. And what I mean is this, like, if you got a guy who needs to work on his handle, like, it's going to look better in high school or college simply because they're just going to be able to get by guys and just be able to make moves that just work for them at that level because they're bigger, faster, stronger. I think for me, as Jaden continues to evolve as a player, like, what version of him do we see? Do we see a version of him where, he's a reliable, wing type player who can, knock down threes at, let's say, a 36 to 37% clip, who can attack closeouts and maybe make some, dunker spot passes or some kickouts, but who could also get to the rim and flush it, on some guys? Like, to me, those are the two guys that need to evolve. I think for me, D'Angelo Russell is where is where he's at. If I'm not mistaken, he's in a contract year. So hopefully you start to see some of that come to fruition where you've got somebody who knows, all right, I'm in a contract year. I got to make it do what it do, right? I've got to go out here and really do it, make it work. Let me go in and hold on a second before I put my foot completely in my mouth here. Hold on. Because I could be wrong on that. Hold on. Okay, so yes, this is final year of the 4-year contract that he signed with Minnesota. So next summer, 2023, he'll be an unrestricted free agent. So yeah, it's a contract year. And as it were, you as a player just know that, look, whether it's staying and signing an extension here in Minnesota or whether it's potentially getting my next deal, elsewhere, it's an important year. So, the other part of it is if Anthony Edwards takes the leap that some of you are hoping for, that we just mentioned a second ago, and Jaden McDaniel starts to show more things offensively, and Karl Anthony Towns is still a Karl Anthony Towns, like, how many shots are there to go around? Not to say that there's just going to be a shot problem in Minnesota. I'm just simply saying that, like, if we're expecting Jaden McDaniels to take a step forward, we're expecting Anthony Edwards to really start to blossom in like an all-NBA way, and Karl Anthony Towns still Karl Anthony Towns, well, what's that leave left for D'Angelo Russell in a contract year? So I think for me, that's kind of where the interesting part becomes, is what's he look like, and is he, potentially still part of this team? Because, I mean, look, you know, when you have a healthy D'Angelo Russell, you're talking about a guy who can get you 18 to 20, you know, as a scorer, and usually right around 7-8 assists. It's a quality point guard when healthy, at least in a way offensively. So, you know, depends on what area he lives in. Is he able to take? Does he take more of a step down offensively, just like a half step down offensively, and maybe now he's living more in the 15 to 17 range, maybe not getting as many shots, but, you know, still hitting threes at a career level clip while still getting you 7 to 8 assists a night? Maybe. But those are more of the kind of the things that are interesting to me is in a contract year what's the answer for D'Angelo Russell? You've got, you know, a good bit of talent, emerging talent around you. You know, what's your answer to that in terms of what you do night in and night out? You know, and again, Anthony Edwards taking a step forward, Jalen McDaniels taking a step forward. And, you know, and look, Rudy Gobert doesn't necessarily need to be a guy, you know, he's not going to be a get him the ball in the paint kind of guy. He's just going to be a dunker spot kind of guy and, you know, offensive rebound and put back kind of guy. And, you know, so there's not a lot there that he needs to be anything more than an elite rebounder and, you know, an elite rim protector. It's what you need him to be. So it really comes down to the other four guys offensively in terms of what they give you night in and night out and how D'Angelo Russell is able to facilitate, you know, with all that and run all that. It's a great problem to have. I mean, when you've got talent around you and you're the point guard, it's an awesome problem to have. You know, who do I get the ball to? Who's got the best mismatch? Maybe it is you, but maybe some nights it's Anthony Edwards and he's getting you 25 a night. Maybe it's Karl-Anthony Towns getting you 25 a night. Maybe Jaden McDaniels is having a really good game, so it becomes Jaden. I mean, it's a good problem to have. But that's where for me it becomes interesting. You got a point guard that a lot has been talked about and expected of since he came into the league. He's in a contract year, and he's got more talent around him than he's had thus far in his career. And I'm recalling his time back to Brooklyn where he was an all-star, I believe, in 18-19. You know, obviously the younger Lakers team, that he played on. So, I mean, I would say to a man, in terms of your starting five, so, you know, the most talent you've played with in a starting five situation. Now, if I'm forgetting something, forgive me, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in that way. So, you know, what's your adjustment? So there's a lot here to be excited about, really and truly. You know, and I think for me, the Timberwolves are another team that night in, night out, it'd be fun just to tune in to see what things are looking like, you know. And so I'm certainly interested. All right, Timberwolves down to... Let's see. Do we really need to touch anything with the Pelicans? Obviously, we get the Zion Williamson extension. Outside of that, how much really is there that we hadn't already seen last year that I'm just going to be rehashing? Probably not much. Look, I'm always excited to see young guys. So Herbert Jones is obviously somebody I'm excited for. You know, another season under the belt of C.J. McCollum with this team. So, yeah, I mean, I think obviously the biggest thing here is Zion. It's just health and, you know, how well he's able to help the team when he's fully healthy, back, and just doing what he's doing, what he's capable of doing. You know, so it'll be fun to see him on the floor and seeing exactly how this team looks. I mean, look, there's nothing. It's a solid starting five between McCollum, Ingram, Herbert Jones for what he's already been showing as a 3-and-D wing. You know, Zion Williamson, and then, you know, Jonas has been a quality big in this league for a minute. You know, he just has. I mean, you know, now he's the most switchable guy. And he's just, you know, a very huge, large human being. But ultimately, he can produce for you. You got some nice young pieces that are able to come off your bench. Devontae Graham, Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy, Jackson Hayes. We'll see. I don't know. Like I said, I think the biggest thing here is more so just what Zion's going to look like night in, night out. And I think obviously if you watch any of him, before going down to the injury and all this stuff that's been going on, like, why it is to be excited about him. And you know what he's capable of when he's fully healthy. But, we'll see. I mean, this is a team that's definitely got some upside. And, yeah. All right. Let's see. Do I want to pick on the Knicks? No. Do I? No. Do I? I don't know. I'm not going to pick on the Knicks, just FYI. You know what? Here's my thing with the Knicks. Obviously, the Donovan Mitchell thing didn't work out. Ultimately, I think Jalen Brunson is going to be a nice addition for him. I think you can get them right there around the 16 to 17 a game, 18 a game potentially, and, about 7 to 8 assists a game. So I think he'll be a quality point guard. I do. It all just comes down to the rest of the pieces, just in terms of, R.J. Barrett typically needs the ball in his hands to score. Julius Randle needs the ball in his hands to score. I think the bench is okay. I mean, it's, Quentin Grimes. We'll see what version of Cam Reddish we may or may not get, because, I don't know if he necessarily wants to be there or if that's the best opportunity for him. It may not be. But even if we take kind of that out of the fold, Grimes, Toppin, Hartenstein, McBride, Jericho Sims. It's not a bad bench to sneeze at. Manuel Quickly. I think Grimes is more the guy you would want to go to in terms of scoring off the bench. Toppin is obviously a lob target and in a transition threat who can occasionally stretch the floor. Isaiah Hartenstein is a quality backup big in this league. Jericho Sims is a good young big, rebounds, block shots, just good athlete. I don't think the bench is too bad. I really just think it boils down to putting a point guard in there like Jalen Brunson and seeing how he can make the offense kind of go, without necessarily it always being Julius potentially bringing the ball up and doing something, or RJ doing the ball and something, or Evan Fournier, trying to do something one-on-one. Like, can we get a point guard in here and make it a more cohesive thing where we've got movement and we've got guys that aren't necessarily relying on having to have the basketball in their hands in order to score? Like, what's the evolution here? So I don't necessarily think that it's all bad in New York. So in any event, let's see. Oklahoma City. What's to be said that hasn't already been said about this team for the last handful of years in terms of exciting young talent, but ultimately where does this talent go? SGA, Giddey obviously had a very good rookie season. Teo Maladone had some early flashes, but really just kind of faded away. Pokusevski really hasn't done much. I really like the Jalen Williams draft pick. I think he can be a quality wing in this league for sure. And depending upon how you feel about, like, let's say Darius Baisley or, Aaron Wiggins or some of these other guys that just kind of feel like, you know, like they may not be a long-term answer in terms of that spot, like that kind of that wing spot, then okay, you know. So I think, you know, ultimately for me, I really like the Jalen pick. Obviously, you know, we see Chet go down to a weird injury. You know, it's you know, it's unfortunate, you know, but obviously there are a lot of people who are like, well, hey, you guys should come out and play, you know, these pro-am games. Well, they play them, and, you know, sometimes shit happens. You know, then everybody wants to, you know, play armchair doctor. Well, you shouldn't have been out there. And okay. So you want them out there because you want them to show they love the game and show that they're working on their game. You know, I thought the most interesting part of that injury, if I can for a second call it interesting, is the fact that when he was getting ready to be drafted, or when he was drafted, you'd see all these people on Twitter put out these memes of the Joker being thrown like 50 feet back, and people putting the caption of, you know, Chet take the first time he takes the charge from LeBron. Meanwhile, we fast forward to a pro-am, and here's LeBron coming down, and Chet just, you know, makes a common basketball player, keeps his hands up, gets back in defense, walls up to try to prevent, you know, a score at the rim, which he did. You know, LeBron didn't score, and he just lands on his foot wrong. You know, just shit happened. Wasn't anything crazy. So anyway, I just found it interesting that was kind of the thing that was going around, and all of a sudden a pro-am game shows up, and, you know, it's not like he got knocked in his ass or anything like that. Nothing crazy. It was just a common basketball play that resulted in a freak injury. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, getting back to talking about OKC as a team, like, you know, just having a collection of young guys, like, at some point, what's the next step here? You know, I like Trey Mann, great. You know, Josh Giddey, like him, cool. You know, like Lou Dort as kind of a 3-and-D, you know, guard who just gets down and scrappy, just plays hard. You know, Darius Baisley's just kind of gone down by the wayside. JRE, I've never really been a huge believer in. Some people are. I'm not that high on them. You know, I just think after a while, like, you know, what's the exciting part anymore? So I just think Oklahoma City is just kind of where they are. It'd have been nice to see him with Chet and, you know, continue to see that. And I think going into next season with Chet in the fold, you know, we can start to maybe get a little more excited again. The thought of him, SGA, Giddey, just those three alone, like that's something to definitely want to tune in for. But for right now, just kind of is what it is. I think probably the guy amongst all these guys that I'm most excited to kind of see is, you know, Josh and Jalen. I kind of know what, you know, SGA is going to be night in and night out, and trust me, I've always been a fan of his game. But I mean, ultimately, like, you know, what else is there? You know, what's the next step? As I keep saying, what's the next step? You know, for some of these younger guys, there's an evolution. So I'd say, you know, for me, probably the three guys that kind of interested in seeing what their next step is going into the season if in Oklahoma City is Giddey, Jalen Williams, and Trey Mann. I feel like I know what SGA is. I feel like I know what Darius Baisley is. I feel like I know what Lugunsdort is. I feel like I know what JRE is. You know. So, going into the season, I just think it kind of is what it is at this point. All right, Oklahoma City. Some of you are like, damn, you spent more time talking about Oklahoma City than the Milwaukee Bucks. How dare you? I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, you know, got to mention them to some degree because everybody loves their young talent, but I think you kind of need to put it in a perspective of like, okay, but really what's next? Steve, they're young. I get it, but, you know, what's next? All right, Orlando Magic. Well, one of the talks of Eurobasket thus far has been the evolution of Franz Wagner. Deservedly so. I will proudly and happily say this was a guy that I was wrong about. Wasn't very high on him coming out of Michigan, but he's done the work to shut me the hell up. At least for now. We'll see how teams eventually adjust the guys and you become more of a focal point in the scouting reports. So we'll see. But ultimately, definitely was a guy that I can say I was wrong about to a degree. So those of you who are high on him, good for you. Look, this is it's another one of these weird young teams. Like, everybody's expecting a step up from Wendell Carter Jr. I certainly think that could be the case. I think Paolo Banchero should probably be the runaway favorite for Rookie of the Year. Typically, that's an award that goes to whoever gets the highest point per game as a rookie. So, to me, it'd be him or, Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray's another one that I think, has a good chance to potentially score enough as a rookie to potentially get that award. But, neither here nor there. I think the most interesting parts here right at this point are between Wagner, Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. What Cole Anthony eventually is able to do for them, what Suggs is able to look like in another year behind him, RJ Hampton. Like, none of it is overly exciting. Certainly I was hopeful players are able to take that next step in their career and their evolution as a player, but ultimately I think the guys that are probably the most exciting to think about are the guys that you really think have a chance to really take that next noticeable step up. And I think that, like I said, rests with Wagner, Banchero, and Wendell. It's a shame that, Gary Harris is going through the injuries he's going through right now. And obviously you never want to see that, especially given in light of the fact of where Gary Harris kind of started his NBA career, where it looked like it was going. Now all of a sudden we're at where we're at. Chuma Okeke and Jonathan Isaacs, these three guys kind of fall within that category of guys that you saw some nice things out of at certain points in their career or, their collegiate career, and you're like, okay, you're just hoping to see more. Maybe even Mo Bamba in that way, but hasn't really had like any of the injuries. Like Chuma had the ACL coming out of Auburn. Jonathan's, injury history is well documented, and then Gary's going through what he's going through now. But I think they've got, a few guys on this team that, at different points they looked like, oh, this could be something of quality down the road, and now it just hasn't turned out to be that. So beyond that, it's like, what else is there here? What's the next step for Jalen Suggs at this point? Certainly, still optimistic about what he could be. Cole Anthony, but it's, at some point, I really just think it all boils down to Wagner, Banchero, and Wendell. I know I keep saying that, but unless there's something here that I'm just not thinking or seeing right now, I don't know what else to really be overly optimistic about or to tell you to be excited about tuning in for. Always would encourage anybody to tune in and watch young players, but I think when you're talking about that with this team, it's Wagner and Banchero. Banchero, Paolo's going to give you a reason to tune in most nights. And I certainly fall in that category. And I will definitely be going to an increased number of Magic games this year, given his roster spot on the team, being part of the team. So that's certainly going to be a reason to be more of an attendance in those games. All right. All right. Do we really? How much do we need to go on about the Sixers that we didn't see last year? Is there anything? I say ultimately, no, not really. Phoenix, of course, they look like they're may not, the conversation was they may not match, for Ayton, and of course they do, because I think ultimately they realize, like, it's either him or we end up with nobody at all, because it doesn't look like we're going to get KD, and I don't think Ayton's going to be a desirable enough trade piece to let go of a top 5 player, regardless of how old he is. So, look, DeAndre Ayton's a productive player. He's going to have nights where he frustrates the fuck out of you. He doesn't try hard enough on the glass, But ultimately, again, it's always important to put these players in proper context. Like, he's going to live in the space of giving you about 15 to 20 a night. He's going to have some nights where he gives you more. And he's going to have some nights where he grabs you 12, 13 rebounds. And he's going to come back the next night and give you less than 10. There's just going to be some variance there. And ultimately, your willingness to be pissed off about it is really just going to be the determining factor about how you feel about him and just the team in general and all that. And of course, Chris Paul has only got but so much time left, and clearly, he's still able to play at a certain level, but at some point that kind of goes by the wayside. Booker's there long term. Mikal Bridges is there long term. It's, I think for me, the player I really look at is to really try to figure out, like, what's the next step. It really is Mikal Bridges. Like, I don't really know what other player, because you know who Chris Paul is, you know who Devin Booker is, you know who DeAndre Ayton is, or at least you should. You know who Jay Crowder is at this point, or at least you should. And the rest of these guys, like, the only guy really left to take really like a step up that would be of any real significance is Mikal Bridges. Again, I just don't know how to spin to you that DeAndre Ayton is who he is. It's still a good player, still be a very good player, and playing with the right point guard, he can. There's about a half a step more up he can potentially take. But it's not like he's not playing with a good point guard already. He's playing with Chris Paul. We're not talking about he's up here playing with a scrub. He's playing with a generational point guard as it is. So, again, properly contextualizing what DeAndre Ayton is key. Not putting additional strain on what he should or shouldn't be. Like, he is what he is. And still a productive big. Still going to get you quality production more often than not. But basically, he's not playing next to Devin Booker. He's never going to be the guy that you just go to. Maybe in some situations and in some matchups, sure. But ultimately, like, when you look at this roster, you say to yourself, like, who's the guy that's going to make a difference if they took a step up? And it's Mikal Bridges. And the question becomes, can he? Will he? Some of you are expecting that he's going to be, closer to a 17 to 20 a point a game per night guy. I don't see it. Doesn't mean he can't be a quality 3-point shooter. Doesn't mean he can't be that he won't still continue to play at a high level defensively. But what else is there that you can expect? So, ultimately, if he is able to take that step up and be, you can't even really call him the third guy, but maybe a third guy on some nights if DeAndre just doesn't have it. But ultimately, like, that's the only guy left. So they've got a quality team, obviously. We know that. We also know that, they've got pretty solid bench pieces, so they've got a good team, right? And this isn't a team that just got put together yesterday. They've played together for some time now. So, ultimately, it's like, okay, well, what else can happen here? We know they're very good at home, and bottom line, like, all right, what's left? What's the next thing here? You know, and I think, like I said, I think DeAndre Ayton, you should know more or less what to expect at this juncture. Still, you know, a quality NBA player. Still very much a productive NBA player. He's going to have some really good nights where you're going to be happy you had him on your team. You know, it's not going to be weird to see him go 22-14, but it's also not going to be weird to see him go for 15-9. You know, like ultimately, all these conversations boil around what's the thing that's really going to matter for you come playoff time. Sure, you want DeAndre Ayton to be the second guy. Devin's going to be the first. You really don't want to have to depend on Chris Paul too much, especially as he's getting older. But you know that you can do that to some degree. But you'd rather it be DeAndre Ayton because he's the young guy with the new contract and number 1 overall pick and these expectations and da-da-da. We could have had Luka, but we got this guy. Da-da-da. I get it. But ultimately, like, you have to, you know, properly contextualize, like, what it is that your expectations are. So for me, I'm looking at Mikal Bridges and saying, what's next? I already feel like I know what I've got with all these other guys. What's next for you? What is there? And if the answer is, look, I am who I am, like where I'm at, it's not going to vary too much. Still a quality player. Absolutely. But that just means that as other Western Conference and Eastern Conference teams get better, you're not necessarily a shoo-in to make a finals appearance. You're not necessarily a shoo-in to make a Western Conference finals appearance. Okay? So you become a good to very good regular season team that gets a good seed, eventually gets knocked out in the second round by a team that's just playing better, like they did with Dallas. And that's that. And if that's what we're dealing with, then okay. That's just what it is. And then you, as a front office and staff, have to kind of figure out, okay, where do we want to go from here? You know, obviously, I'm sure if you gave everybody, you know, truth serum in the front office of Phoenix, I'm sure they'd love to have Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and KD going into next season. It's not going to happen. At least not right now. I mean, he's still in Brooklyn. I mean, who knows? Something. You know, maybe something gets put together, but ultimately, if Brooklyn's eventually going to want Devin Booker back, that's never going to happen. So, you know, obviously trade demands change as the league kind of shows you their cards and says this is what we're willing to give up. And then as a front office, you have to say, well, but this player got X amount back, and it's like, well, that player's not this player. So ultimately, I don't know that Phoenix is the team to necessarily land even a guy like that. I don't. So, I mean, ultimately, what's next? Good to very good regular season team, bounced in the second round. I think that's kind of where this team lives right now. Doesn't mean that they can't get hot going into the playoffs and show up in the Western Conference Finals. But then, are they good enough to, you know, to make it, into... You know, make it into that championship, be a champion. Ultimately, where this team lives, potential is second round to conference finals. You know, but if the Clippers, let's say, if they are who people are expecting them to be, if Golden State obviously still continue to play at a peak level. If the Grizzlies still continue to play at the level they're playing at, if Minnesota keeps taking a step forward, you know, like those are teams right there that I don't necessarily know that you're better than. You know? Now, if we took the Clippers out of the mix, okay, cool. They're not as good as, you know, they were going to be because injuries, load management. All right, we're just better. All right, takes them out. Golden State, get another year older, okay, but so is Chris Paul. And eventually, you play this waiting game with Golden State. Well, your point guard's getting a year older every time too. So now you end up in a situation that they were in prior to Chris Paul, which is they didn't have a point guard. So, you're on a timetable where you're looking across the room and you're saying, well, shit, the best team in our conference is getting older, but we probably still can't beat them in a 7-game series. Okay. Clippers may not be who we think they are, so maybe they're not as much of a threat. Memphis is still young, and they're still trying to figure out ways to win high-level games. But then I would also argue, isn't Phoenix? I mean, who on this team has really won high-level games? Chris Paul, but he hasn't been to a finals. Some of you may look at that as a cheap shot or whatever, but it's just truth. So they've got one guy that, truly has won at like a conference finals level, in terms of like your guys. Like I'm not talking about across the board. I'm talking about like your guys. Like Chris Paul, Booker, Bridges, Ayton. Like those, like when you talk about the team, those are the guys that you go to. Whether because you're excited about their upside like Bridges, or they're young up and coming guys that you're hoping more for, like DeAndre Ayton, or you're talking about more your established guys like Paul and Booker. Those are the guys you're going to talk about. So that's not a knock on Jay Crowder, right? I'm just saying ultimately, like, of the guys that are going to get you there, or that you expect are going to get you there, whom other than Chris Paul amongst those 4 have done it? That's the point I'm making. So, point of it all being is like, what's the step here? What's the next thing? All right. So from them, we'll touch on Portland for a minute. Anthony Simons, good for him getting the extension, getting a nice, a good, a very good contract for him, and I'm hoping he can adequately fill the C.J. McCollum shoes. Obviously, getting a younger player, that can potentially do some of the same things to a degree that C.J. was doing, it's always going to be an avenue teams are going to hope for and explore. So Portland does that. Of course, Dame is there. They get Jeremy Grant into the fold there. Nurkic, has had some nice moments even in Eurobasket. I mean, it's been kind of nice to see him kind of mobile and making plays, over there. And, we'll see what that does for him coming into another NBA season. They bring in Gary Payton II, which, is a quality bring-in. Having Josh Hart, Payton, Trendon Watford coming off of Summer League the way he did, but then also having some flashes during the regular season last year. Then we'll see if and what we can get out of Shaedon Sharpe, if anything. May it be injury or just spending more time in the G League just to, because obviously, coming into the NBA, it's not like he's coming off of a full college season or 2 college seasons or whatever. So, I don't know how much you can expect to even see of him, if anything. More than likely, it's just going to end up being the G League. So, ultimately, you've got between Lillard, Simons, Little, Jeremy Grant, Nurkic, Payton, Hart, Watford. Now, I just think that it just puts a lot on Lillard, Simons, and Grant offensively, and then defensively, there's really nobody here, at least within the starting 5, that you're overly concerned with. So I just think, ultimately, Grant's a nice offensive addition. It's good to see Simons get the extension he gets as a young player. And then, bringing in Hart, from the C.J. McCollum trade, having him there for another season, and then bringing in Gary Payton. outside of that, like, I don't know what's next for this team, really. I mean, it's just going to have to continue to build through the draft some way or another, or through free agency, or however they see themselves doing it. So far, it's basically just been through, with Simons, it was through the draft. Through Little, it was through the draft. Through Jeremy Grant, it was obviously through through trade. And somebody, Peyton, free agency, Josh Hart, trade. So, if that's kind of the route they see themselves going, we'll see what Shaedon Sharpe can eventually give them down the road, but I don't think it's going to mean for much in 22-23. So it just depends on the route that this team, attempts to go. I mean, I think for a lot of these smaller market teams, I know there's that need when you've got a Damian Lillard to say we have to maximize this guy's time with us, but I mean, ultimately, you've got to be able to put yourself in a situation where you can rely on the draft to essentially build your team up. It's not easy doing it through trade and free agency when you're a smaller market team, especially if you don't have a ton of trade assets, or eventually they start to diminish because you've already used them. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in Portland, but it's one of those deals where it just depends on what route they plan to take. All right, Sacramento. I like the Herter addition. Keegan Murray, I'm excited about as a rookie for sure. Davion Mitchell, I'm really interested to see what he does with another year under his belt. And then it's just the usual suspects between Fox, Barnes, and Sabonis. Sabonis obviously coming in last year. I don't know how excited I can be about this team. There's elements of it that I can be excited about, but obviously it all comes down to who and what can move the needle for you. I really liked the Keegan Murray pick. I really did. It's been a while since I've actually been impressed with a lottery pick that the Sacramento Kings have made, but that's certainly one of them. That's certainly one of them. So I think ultimately, it's a nice thing, and of course, Davion Mitchell. To give them credit, I mean, those are two guys that I like that they've drafted the last 2 years. But that's ultimately going to be how this team rebuilds. I think at some point, it's hard not to think that De'Aaron Fox isn't going to be somewhere else. We'll see what happens with Sabonis long term, but I mean, ultimately, this team's going to have to figure out a way to get the draft right. It's just what it is. And I think they took a quality step in the right directions with Murray and with Mitchell. I do. But ultimately, you got to get the draft right when you're these teams. It's just what it boils down to. I don't really give a shit what pressure it puts on your scouting department or your GMs or your assistant GMs, the guys who eventually make the calls on who to draft. But got to get it done. I mean, it's just what it is. There's not. Once you run out of trade chips, or once those trade chips go from having a certain value to decreasing value, it's like, well, what do you do? So eventually Sacramento's got to figure out, via the draft. I think Portland's going to be in the same boat. I mean, it's kind of where that's at, and it's just hard to avoid. All right, so going from teams that need to get it right into the draft into a team that had a previous history of getting it right in the draft. Now lately it's been a little touch and go, but I think this draft they might have done all right for themselves. Talking about the San Antonio Spurs. I liked the Blake Wesley pick. I liked, the Malachi Branham pick. Wasn't as high on Branham as some. Jeremy Sochan wasn't as high as some. But, I could see why people liked Sochan in terms of being kind of that ultimate high motor glue guy that you can just go out and trust can make a basketball play for you. Malachi Branham being a quality shot maker, Blake Wesley being this hyper athletic, downhill guard that can just, flat out score. So I thought they did. I thought, looking at it from this current view, having seen Summer League, ultimately getting a feel for these guys to some degree, I liked, what they did in the draft in that way. Now, as far as the rest of the team goes, between Trey Jones, who, I thought for when he was with Memphis, was just one of the better backup point guards in the league. Now he gets a chance to start. And I expect that he'll still be a very quality and capable guard in this league for sure. Starting role or not, I think he'll be quality for sure. And then it comes down to the wings on this team: Vassell, Josh Primo. It's like what's the, we kind of know we got a Keldon Johnson at this point. I think Jakob Pearl's been quietly, good for them. His stock continues to rise. I think. So there's some quality NBA players here, but that's the thing with some of these teams. They've got quality NBA players, but ultimately the teams that you're chasing after, the teams that you're trying to compete with, they have that next level of NBA player, and San Antonio just hasn't had it for a while. I mean, again, I'm excited about Keldon Johnson, what he can continue to evolve into. I think Trey Jones is going to be a quality starting point guard for them. Jakob Poeltl, like I said, is kind of quietly a very solid NBA player in his own right. And then I like what they did through the draft. So how all these pieces eventually mesh over the next 2 to 3 years while they still work their way through the draft. If there is a team amongst these teams that have just kind of faltered in the draft in more recent years, certainly San Antonio is a team that you could bet on that will eventually start to figure it out. And this might be, coming off this 22 draft, this certainly might be the draft where, things start to turn around a little bit, just in terms of having that young talent that can eventually, start showing what it is that they can do. So I'm excited for them in that way, for sure. All right, let's move on from San Antonio to, you know what? Going to the Raptors. I mentioned at the top of this podcast the Rico Hines runs and whatnot, and I've been really excited and impressed, whatever word you want to use, by what I've seen through some of these runs. And yes, I understand they're open gym runs, and guys aren't really playing hard because nobody wants to get hurt. Nobody wants to, Rico always say, it's like, if a guy's got it, let him have it. It means there's no need to try to pin a guy's shit to the backboard. Like, just, they got it, they got it, and we're just out here to play, get our shit off, work on your stuff, play hard, play like you give a shit, but ultimately, like, we don't want to be sending anybody home because they're injured. But even with that kind of being the context of those runs, like, it's still encouraging to see, Gary Trent out there, Scotty Barnes out there. Scotty Barnes, I mean, he's really worked on his shot. If you look at those workouts, those practices, I should say, or open runs, I'm probably a better way to put it. I'm sorry. If you really watch those, like, his shot really is starting to come a long way. Chris Boucher, Pascal Siakam being out there, I mean, it's been really impressive to really see these guys put in that kind of work. Malachi Flynn's been out there. I do, to a degree, echo the sentiments that Paul George shared. One of the ends of the open run, Paul George shared with the group that he just thought that Toronto showed a lot by coming out to a lot of these runs and it played well. And he ended up by saying, "I wouldn't be surprised if you guys started off the season hot." And I would echo those sentiments. I would. You think about what Scotty could be at this point. An all-star level player. Pascal's been an all-star. Fred VanVleet's been an all-star level player. Gary Trent is, a quality wing in this league. At this point, beyond that, you take Boucher into consideration. Obviously, OG. Really, at this point, it's more for this team to continue just to add as much quality depth that they can, and just continue to fill out the roster and guys, taking on their spots. I mean, Malachi Flynn, Delano Banton. I'm excited to see what they can do. Otto Porter joins the fold there too. So I mean, they're starting to do it, but ultimately, what it looks like in the next 2-3 years, we'll have to see. But I just I think the team is going to play hard and play well. Even on the nights where they lose, I think you can walk away and going to be impressed with these guys. So that's what I'm expecting out of Toronto this year, honestly. Just really interested to see what they'll actually do. All right, we're almost at the end here. Utah Jazz. Obviously, the trades in which they have engaged in, shipping out Donovan, shipping out Rudy, getting back, Sexton, Markkanen, Taylor Horton Tucker, Jared Vanderbilt, just Ochai Agbaji coming over in the Cleveland trade as a rookie. Obviously this team is making a play for the long-term future in terms of getting draft picks and eventually, obviously going through a rebuild. But I'd be really interested to kind of see what Colin Sexton looks like coming back off injury. And so for me, it's, just putting into the right context that this is a team obviously is going through a rebuild. I mean, bottom line. But there's still some reasons to watch. Like, I'm interested to see what Taylor Horton Tucker's going to do, with a new surrounding. Lauri Markkanen had some quality play in Cleveland. What does it look like in Utah? Colin Sexton, again, coming back from injury. Mike Conley, obviously he's always kind of been this sturdy, steady point guard, but he's getting older, and people, are looking at the fact that, well, he doesn't really look to finish at the rim much anymore, and it's not always been, a high-quality scorer, shooter, at different points and this and that, and so what does he eventually look like, or where, is he eventually even still there? There's some young pieces here I like. Having Jared Vanderbilt, Horton Tucker, Malik Beasley, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, those kind of guys kind of coming off your bench to kind of make up your second unit. And then, still having Bogdanovich. And it's still some trade pieces here to a degree that, certain teams are going to want. I mean, there's still going to be teams out there that are going to want a steady point guard like Conley. There's still going to be teams that are going to want a shooter like Bogdanovich or like Markkanen. But again, they've got some quality young pieces they can try out and see if they become part of the long-term fold there. But it's a rebuilding team, obviously. So, for me, it's just keeping that in the context and just being excited about some of the young guys and hoping that they can eventually, be a part of the fold there more in long-term plans, and, just hoping that the next 2 or 3 years are bad enough to where you get the right kind of draft picks and get some guys who might be able to turn this thing around quicker for you. All right, last and not least, Washington Wizards. Well, of course, a lot was made of, getting Bradley Beal back into the fold, and a lot of questions of was he going to be there and whatnot, and of course now we know he's signed there long term. Of course, the attention turns to Porzingis coming off injury, and continue to build his way back and hoping that what kind of, NBA player, what form he can return back to. He's played overseas during some of this time that, we've been in summer, and, so we'll have to see exactly what he boils back down to, or what he comes back to in terms of what kind of form of player. I think Kyle Kuzma is what he is. Monte Morris has always been a quality guard within the league. I don't necessarily know that Johnny Davis is going to be able to add much for him this year. I don't know how much Denny's going to do for them. Hopefully he gets more of an opportunity and you can see more of a maturation in his game. Rui coming off the injury, Daniel Gafford's an on again, off again quality big. Ultimately this is a team that again, is gonna have to figure. A lot of these teams are just gonna have to figure out the draft. I don't think Johnny Davis is gonna help them long term. I don't know how much Denny's gonna help them long term. I don't know how much Rui's gonna help them long term. And that's basically their last 3 draft picks. Oh, and Corey Kispert. So, not that they can't squeeze something out of that between those 4 guys, but I don't necessarily know that you look at that and you say, okay, our future is at least here, and even if we're losing games, we still have some young guys we can be excited about. I don't know that to be the case. I think this year you look at it and you say, let's just hope for another good year, an all-star level year for Brad. Kyle plays can play at a certain level. Kristaps maybe is better than what we're crossing our fingers for, and we can be happy about that. And then where all these young pieces kind of fit in, they just fit in. Will Barton being a part of that team, a quality wing in this league for a long time. DeLon Wright, quality guard in this league for a long time. Taj Gibson coming in, but ultimately it's you're looking at your 3 key guys between Beal, Kuzma, and Porzingis, and hoping that they can essentially be the best versions of themselves, and that every other guy just plays their role and plays hard every night, and at least they're fun to watch more times than they're not. Because obviously there's going to be some nights where it just looks bad, and you want a team that's just going to compete their ass off and realize the situation that they're in, but that they've also got 3 quality, starters that could potentially be good for them. And then you add in, again, quality NBA players that start for you like Monte Morris and Will Barton. Maybe your starting 5 can really play at such a level where, it's fun to watch them. You're still losing a lot of games, but at least it's fun to watch. And there's definitely been years where it's like that. You can watch any number of the, we'll say, lottery pick teams, and there's still nights where it's fun to watch them. They compete their ass off, or they've got someone like a Bradley Beal, and you're just like, shit, this guy just went off for 35, and it was a hell of a lot of fun watching it. Or Kyle Kuzma or Kristaps, and what they could potentially be. But ultimately, I think it's going to be about enjoying the process of how hard these guys can play, and just riding the wave, and then just hoping that when the lottery balls pop up, you get a good enough spot where you can get make some quality draft choices. Again, I'm not too high on the picks between Davis, Denny, and Rui, but it doesn't mean that Rui didn't show some moments and spots before he went down with injury that he couldn't be have some quality as an NBA player, and Denny the same thing. So maybe there's more here than I'm being optimistic about or being pessimistic about. But I think ultimately, you just really have to hope that this team plays its ass off and that it's fun more often than it's not. All right. Well, that's me catching up for the last month or so. It's a pretty long podcast in and of itself, so hopefully I touched on enough that made you interested to listen through. But ultimately, I didn't want to bore you with too much of summer basketball talk, even though I could sit there and do it. I think it's probably just more important to get on here and talk with you guys when I feel it's appropriate, and obviously doing it with more consistency during the regular season, and that's definitely something I'll aim to do. And certainly be looking to put out more content, draft content, and other types of content that I'm in the works of trying to do. And so we'll see. Just keep an eye on the YouTube channel, Hardwood Hoop Central's NBA Draft Green Room. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but look for it. Our podcast can always be found on our YouTube channel, but of course, being a podcast, it's on all podcast platforms. Apple, Spotify, just about anywhere you can, look for look for podcasts. I'm all but positive I can be found. Best way to search for it would be Hardwood Hoop Central, and then just look for the Prospect Pod logo, and then you should have no problem finding it. All right. But other than that, just want to thank you guys for again listening to another episode of the Prospect Pod, for sticking with me, for really rocking with the content, providing positive feedback, or even constructive criticism. I appreciate all of it. So just keep that energy up, and let's just continue to do the best we can to put out quality content, and we will see you next time on another episode of the Prospect Pod. Take care.
About to begin.